Hey guys, tonight, we're stepping into a world that's far more than just history. This is a grand stage, where the past and tragedy become one. So take a breath, close your eyes for a moment, and picture this, ancient Rome, choking under a sky burning red-orange, as if fresh blood had spilled from the heavens above. The air is thick, almost sticky, as though someone had poured honey into the sky. And then set it all ablaze. Before we sink into warm blankets and soft pillows, take a moment, just one breath, to like this video and subscribe, but only if you're truly intrigued by what lies beyond the doors of history. And if you're already on board, feel free to leave a comment with your location and local time. There's something strangely magical about knowing someone, somewhere across the world, is listening to these same stories at the very same hour. Now, dim the lights just a little, until only a soft, hazy glow remains. Maybe switch on a small fan too, to create a gentle background hum, like a breeze drifting through the charred alleyways of a Rome long turned to ash. And now, we begin a journey you may never forget. You are standing in the heart of Rome, once the crown jewel of an empire, but today, glory has stepped aside. This is no longer the center of the civilized world. It is a giant torch, a blazing inferno, glowing hell-red as if the gates of the underworld had cracked open right beneath the city's central forum. And in that scene, while the city drowns in earthly damnation, you hear it, a single, lonesome sound. A string instrument, slow and aching, weeping its melody into the smoke-thick air. It winds through blackened marble columns, slips beneath crumbling gates, and wanders down empty streets. It lingers like perfume caught in velvet, light, yet heavy, rich, yet ghostly. Then you see him. He lies reclined, as if attending a private concert performed just for him. It is Emperor Nero, the most powerful man in Rome at the time, the one the empire fears. And the one we are about to meet tonight. Draped in a robe of silk, soft as mist, embroidered with flames that dance across the fabric, Nero plucks the strings of his lyre. Each note falls like ash, sinking, spreading, embedding itself in the hearts of all who remain alive amid the chaos. This is no concert. And it's not a quiet moment of reflection. This is the scene of a grand tragedy. This is not just history. This is history, drawn in strokes of black ink, surreal and chilling, like a dream melting in fire and ash. And you. You are right in the middle of it all. Perhaps you won't survive this journey, or perhaps, by morning, a part of your mind will remain forever trapped in Rome. Rome, in the year 64 AD, you are standing in the heart of ancient Rome, but this is not the Rome from glossy postcards. Not the noble Rome of pure marble statues or bustling piazzas filled with merchants and laughter. No, this is a Rome ablaze, radiant in the most terrifying way. Heat rises from the ground beneath your feet, searing your soles as if you're standing on the surface of a giant frying pan. The air is choked with smoke and the heavy stench of burning wood. Every breath stabs at your lungs like a knife made of soot. This is no longer just a Mediterranean summer, this is the death rattle of an empire, set alight in the middle of the night, and no, this was no ordinary fire. This was a firestorm torn from the mouth of hell itself, a force so fierce it melted marble like butter, reduced ancient columns to rubble, as if the gods had grown bored with their game and flipped the board. The details of that great fire are, even now, a matter of debate. Scholars, historians, and yes, YouTube channels like this one, still comb through faded texts and forgotten records in search of answers. Was it Nero who gave the order to light the match, or was he merely a man who watched too long as everything burned? The truth may have been reduced to ash, lost alongside the thousands of rooftops devoured by that inferno. Still, one thing cannot be denied, Nero's reaction was a performance, both literal and symbolic, in every sense of the word. Some sources claim he climbed a tall tower, one that gave him a sweeping view of the burning city. He wore theatrical robes, vibrant, ornate, his gaze fixed on the flames as if they were brushstrokes on a canvas. And then, as the fire clawed at the sky, Nero began to play his lyre. Softly singing verses from a tragic poem about the fall of Troy. It was a scene both surreal and bone-chilling, an emperor serenading the collapse of his own capital, singing above the roar of flames, the screams of the people, the crashing of rooftops. Yes, it's an image that stays with you. Later storytellers gave him a violin, turning the scene into something even more mythical, but the truth is, violins hadn't been invented yet. That detail was pure invention, a flourish added by later generations who wanted the story to sound more artistic. The lyre, however, certainly did exist, and once you picture a man in silk, playing delicate notes while the world around him burns, well, it's hard not to shiver. Whether Nero truly stayed in Rome during the fire is still up for debate. Some accounts suggest he was away when it started, only returning once the city lay in ruins. But rumors, as you know, move faster than fact. And sometimes, they burn brighter. This is a story too irresistible to forget, an unhinged emperor, more concerned with the soundtrack to tragedy than with the lives lost within it, an artist trapped in the body of a ruler, and fire, not as destruction, but as a stage upon which he could finally perform. And then, even before the ashes had cooled, Nero began to rebuild. But he didn't just restore a city, he erected a dream. Domus Aurea, the golden house, rose from the rubble like a declaration: he would not retreat. This palace was dazzling beyond belief. A dining room that slowly rotated like the heavens, fountains that sprayed perfume into the air, ceilings encrusted with gemstones glittering like a night sky. And in the center of it all stood a towering statue of Nero himself, gazing down on the world like a god surveying his freshly forged creation. The people, however, were far less enchanted. They murmured in the smoke, in the shadowy alleys still charred and broken, that Nero had burned Rome simply to clear space for his palace, and then, to erase suspicion, he cast blame upon the Christians, turning them into human offerings to appease the fury of the public. And you, standing there in that haze, can feel your sandals brushing against the ruins of a legend. You begin to wonder, who was Nero, a tyrant, a misunderstood artist, or merely the victim of the image he had so carefully created? Some stranger tales even claimed Nero believed his music could soothe the souls of those dying in the flames, that the fire had not been a disaster at all, but a divine rehearsal for his sacred performance. One account says he once commissioned a miniature version of the fire, complete with tiny model houses and recorded screams. True or not, no one can say, but captivating, absolutely. And the most chilling part, Nero's death was no less theatrical than his life. When rebellion came for him, when soldiers marched with swords drawn and power slipped through his fingers, Nero chose to end it all, by his own hand, and his final words echoed like the last toll of a tragic bell: "What an artist dies in me." And so the story ends. The fire burns out, the ashes drift down like the first snow of winter, settling gently over the scars of Rome. You walk on, your feet brushing past memories that have turned to dust, and somewhere, just beyond the veil of time, the faint whisper of another ending begins to call to you, waiting, patiently, in the next story. Your feet land on hardened earth, sun-baked and unforgiving beneath your soles, and almost instantly, something shifts. The ground beneath you begins to tremble, not violently, not with the fury of an earthquake, but with a subtle, barely perceptible rhythm. It is a shiver more than a quake, a breath more than a movement. A gentle, nearly invisible vibration that slips through the soles of your feet and into your bones. Most would miss it. Most would dismiss it. But you do not. You pay attention, you are listening. Not just with your ears, but with every nerve in your body. You feel it. Every fine tremor. Every shudder of memory hidden deep beneath the soil. The earth is whispering. Whispering like the breath of a storm still gathering beyond the horizon, the earliest echoes of something massive and ancient. It feels like the memory of footsteps far too large to belong to mortals, pounding across the surface of history, leaving behind scars that no age, no empire, no tide of centuries has been able to smooth away. Behind you, the last flickers of Rome are fading. You've just left it. The air still reeks of smoke and sorrow. The alleyways of the eternal city are threaded with curling tendrils of ash. Rooftops are blanketed in soot like a gray snowfall. Cries of despair and fury ricochet between the scorched stone walls, clinging to every broken corner. Rome smolders in the background. A city undone by its own legends, but before the ruins can settle in your memory like dust on a shelf, before your mind can carve the scene into something permanent, the world fractures once more. Time splits. Space folds. Reality peels apart like ancient cloth torn from the walls of a forgotten temple, and you are no longer standing in the age of concrete and conquest. You are hurled backward. Not gently. Not safely. You are flung into a space older than the empires that would one day name themselves eternal. A space forged in cruelty and chaos, in the primal screams of men and gods. A place older than carved marble and polished rhetoric. A place where stories were born not from ink and paper, but from fire, blood, and unspeakable longing. A place soaked not just in rain and dust, but in an agony too old to name. This is not the age of gladiators who fought for wars of approval in sunlit arenas. This is not the age of emperors chiseling their vanity into marble so they might defy decay. This is something else. This is the breathless dawn of myth. An age where destiny wears the face of a monster. A time where wounds did not heal, but hardened into legend. You feel it in the air, in the silence. The truth of it, the sand beneath your feet is not just dirt. Not just lifeless remnants of a sun-bleached world. It glitters. It hums. Under the blinding, sharp light of an unrelenting sun, the sand gleams like powdered bronze. Each grain seems charged with memory. Each one pulses with the ghosts of warriors long dead. Thousands of feet once pounded across this earth. Thousands of voices once screamed war cries into this wind. And some of those voices still linger, trapped in the heat and silence. Spirits that wander, unsettled. Unburied. Unheard, and now, you are standing at the gates. Not just any gates, the gates of Troy. Troy, the very name reverberates. It is no longer just a location on a map. It has become more than a city. It has become a symbol. A monument carved into the spine of humanity. A cathedral of myth, where tragedy and triumph entwined in a single breath. Here, love devoured itself. Here, vengeance wore a crown. Here, fate played its cruelest games under a sky too blue to weep. The walls rise above you, impossible in their scale. They climb toward the sky with such solemnity, such perfect silence, that they seem to exist outside of time. They do not simply stand. They loom. Towering structures that appear to have been grown from the bones of titans rather than built by mortal hands. You feel them watching you, not with eyes, but with memory. Their stillness holds a breath, like an audience waiting for the final act. Even the wind seems to hold itself back. Time itself pauses here. A hush falls across everything, like a cathedral drawn in stone, and then, a breeze stirs. Gentle, almost shy. It brushes against your face with the softness of a poet's sigh, a whisper composed of old verses and lost laments. It carries with it 1,000 unspoken truths, truths of betrayal and sacrifice, of tenderness shattered by fury. Above all else, it carries the unmistakable perfume of death. A death not of rot, but of meaning. A death carved in ritual and soaked in song. A death that will ripple across centuries, staining every story that follows. Tonight, you will stand witness. You will see it for yourself, the death of Achilles, the greatest warrior who ever lived. Your eyes narrow. The light of the setting sun stretches across the sky, bleeding crimson into the clouds. It spreads like a velvet curtain being drawn across the heavens. The battlefield before you glows with that haunting, amber hue that only comes just before darkness falls. The outlines of the world blur. Everything appears as though painted with watercolors left too long in the rain, and then, he appears, Achilles. He does not arrive. He does not approach. He emerges. He becomes. He takes form like a note rising from a god's lyre. Like a thunderstorm given shape. His figure is tall, commanding, chiseled from sweat and war and the dust of ages. His skin, darkened by years beneath a merciless sun, bears streaks of dirt, ash, and blood. He gleams. Not because of light, but because of the fire inside him. Each of his steps lands like a drumbeat in a funeral procession. Final. Heavy. Inevitable, his armor catches the dying light and reflects it in jagged shards, gold, bronze, crimson. He walks like a flame with legs. He is not just a soldier. He is the last defiant star burning before the night swallows the sky. The poets called him the living torch of war. His eyes, those impossible eyes, do not see the battlefield. They see beyond it. Beyond the moment. They stare into something eternal. Some say he had long known what awaited him. That the prophecy had been rattling inside his mind like a chain for years. But even if he knew, he showed no fear. Not a flicker. Not even a pause. He walked into death not like a victim, but like a guest at a feast prepared just for him. He came with dignity. With certainty. With steel in his blood, and you know this story, don't you? Everyone does. Achilles, the son of the sea goddess. The boy dipped into the river Styx, made invulnerable by divine water. Save for one fatal flaw. One heel. One tiny strip of skin untouched. So small. So forgettable. But it was the crack in a dam built to contain a flood of fate. That oversight became a blade too sharp for even gods to dull. Achilles was no ordinary man. He was a force. A fracture in the order of things. The incarnation of everything raw, ruthless, and radiant. When he left the battlefield, his pride wounded, the Greek army lost its breath. Lost its pulse. Lost its will. But when he returned, when grief for Patroclus lit a fire too wild to contain, the ground itself quaked, Trojans fled, and Hector, the last bright hope of the city, met his end in a duel that felt less like battle and more like ritual. Hector's corpse was not simply taken. It was displayed. Dragged behind Achilles' chariot, around the walls of Troy, a message in blood and dust, and with that act, the hourglass turned, the prophecy whispered of doom. That the slayer of Hector would not live to witness the fall of Troy, fate does not forget. It does not rush. It simply waits. Until all threads are taut, all players in place, now, atop Troy's walls, Paris watches. Paris, the prince whose choices ignited the fuse of this war with one glance, one kiss. He was never a warrior. He was a poet. A lover of words and women. But tonight, he holds a weapon, and some say it was not Paris alone who aimed. That Apollo himself, enraged by Achilles' scorn of the gods, reached down and turned the bow. That the arrow was guided by divine resentment, it flew like a prayer, like a judgment, it cut the wind in half, cleaving through sunlight and shadow alike, and struck precisely where it must, the heel, the single spot. The sacred flaw. Achilles stumbled, and silence fell. Not the silence of peace, but the silence of the moment when time forgets how to move. There was no scream. No crashing collapse. Only stillness. His eyes widened, not with panic, but with awe. With wonder. As though the truth had just arrived. As though he had glimpsed, at last, the boundary between story and reality. His knees buckled. Then he fell. Slowly. Like a statue breaking the second after the final chisel stroke. A column of flesh and legend brought to its end, the sand beneath him absorbed him without protest. It darkened, shade by shade, as if grieving. No spray. No explosion, only a bloom of shadow, spreading outwards. Like ink bleeding into old parchment. A secret offered to the earth, you are still watching. This is the moment when a man becomes myth again, but even now, the tale resists its own ending. Some claim Achilles lingered, that he breathed enough to curse the heavens, that he spoke his final wishes with lips already turning pale. Some say he was carried away, by Ajax, by Odysseus, lifted in arms made heavy by sorrow. Some say he smiled, that in that instant, he accepted it, made peace with the end, and then, he was gone. Like mist vanishing into morning, temples were raised, songs were written, and some believe he and Helen found a world beyond war, beyond grief. A place where peace lived golden and soft, untouched by gods or kings. You kneel, the sword lies still in his grasp, the armor no longer shines. It exhales. Hollow, a quiet ache stirs in you. Not the ache of a fan, but the sadness of one who has just watched the final curtain fall on a play that can never be performed again. The wind stirs, and perhaps, in it, you hear the faintest laugh. Apollo's? Cold. Thin. Distant, you walk away. Not as a victor, but as someone bearing a truth, that even the brightest stars fall, that even legends bleed, and the war, it continues, but not with him, because history does not grieve, not for mortals, not for immortals, not even for the last light of a vanished age. The air around you shifts, subtly, but unmistakably. The soft salt of the sea fills your lungs, yet the familiar sounds of battle have vanished. Gone are the clangs of bronze upon iron, the furious shouts of soldiers locked in a deadly frenzy. All that chaos has faded, leaving behind a silence so profound you can hear the rhythm of your own breathing. It feels as though a door in time has quietly closed behind you, drawing you away from the smoke and screams, from the shrill clash of war, and placing you somewhere entirely different. Here, sound no longer needs to shout to be heard. It is gentle, expansive, and profound, so vast it seems to shrink your heart until it dissolves into the greatness of nature itself. This is the sound of the sea, waves lapping softly against a wooden hull, whispering in rhythm with the night wind and the briny scent of salt. You are standing on an old wooden ship, small and weathered, yet still steadfast. It sways gently in the quiet of night, its bleached and splintering planks groaning faintly beneath your feet, like whispers of journeys long past. The sea below is black as ink, endless and unknowable, pulsing with silent strength, breathing in slow, steady waves that stretch beyond sight. Above you, the stars scatter across the sky like a forgotten map, ancient and trembling. Each one seems to hold the faded fingerprints of spirits long gone, of stories left unfinished. You drift now on the waters of ancient Greece, far from shore, far from anything familiar, alone between sea and sky, in a place where time seems to pause among countless thoughts. At the prow of the ship, a man stands. He leans lightly against the silvered railing, the moon casting its light upon the waves like a carpet of dark red wine. Silence wraps around him, not emptiness, but majesty. You don't need anyone to tell you his name. He is a legend, known to all through tales, through poetry, through songs of glory and sighs of sorrow passed down by the old storytellers. He is Odysseus, he is going home. But home now is only a name, a shadow of an idea that has grown distant and fragile in his heart. It is no longer a place of certainty, but a flickering notion, something as delicate as morning mist dissolving in the first light of dawn. By this point, Odysseus has endured a journey longer and harder than most could imagine. 10 relentless years beneath the gates of Troy, where glory and grief bled into one. The clashing of swords, the cries through fire and smoke, the long, uncertain days forged him into a warrior of iron will. But that was only the beginning. 10 more years he wandered the sea, caught in the grip of gods and monsters, spells and temptations no mortal was meant to face. Each step, each sunrise was a gamble with death, a test of endurance. Yet still he lives, by more than just strength. He survives by his wits, by a cunning sharper than any blade. Odysseus, king of Ithaca, the sly one, the schemer, the silver-tongued sailor who blinded the Cyclops with enchanted wine and escaped death by the skin of his teeth more times than even the gods can count. He is the symbol of perseverance, of survival born not from brute force but from a mind that refused to break, no matter how endless the trials ahead, and yet, there was one thing even he could not outwit, no matter how cunning, no matter how skilled in deception. Time flows like a river that never pauses, never allows anyone to stop, or turn around and linger in the past. It takes away strength, youth, and dreams, quietly, without pity or remorse. Now, Odysseus no longer appears to you as the mighty warrior of legend. He is just a fading shadow etched against the canvas of night, a symbol worn thin by years, like a candle burning low, its final layer of wax clinging stubbornly to the wick. You stand beside him in silence. And in this fragile moment, you can feel the weariness draped over him like a heavy leather cloak, so thick and burdened that even sleep offers no comfort. His shoulders sag, not from the weight of sea wind, but from memories. From wounds carried through 20 long, unrelenting years. A kind of exhaustion so deep it seems to pull at the soul itself, aching to drift away and be forgotten. The sea, the realm that once challenged him with danger at every turn, now holds nothing left to resist. No more islands hiding peril beneath beauty. No more enchanted blossoms that lure the lost into oblivion. No more witches with honeyed eyes and venomous words. No six-headed beasts to battle, no yawning maws of churning darkness threatening to swallow ships whole. All that remains is the gentle breeze, the rhythmic wash of waves, and a man nearing the final shore of a journey every wanderer must one day face, the place where peace and ending quietly await. And yet, just when it feels like this must be the end, the tale turns, a subtle bend in the path, one seldom told, quiet and strange, yet strangely unforgettable. Homer's Odyssey closes the way most would wish for their heroes. Odysseus returns to Ithaca. He reclaims his throne. He slays the suitors who defiled his home. He reunites with faithful Penelope and the son who grew up in his absence. He lives, finally, in peace, his long trials rewarded with the warmth of hearth and family. It is a blessing. A happy ending, hard-earned and well-deserved. But beyond those verses of light and triumph, other voices whisper, soft, uncertain, like forgotten messages drifting in glass bottles across the tide. They speak of a prophecy. A forgotten warning, uttered in the shadowy depths of the underworld, from the ghost of the blind seer Tiresias. He foretold that even after Odysseus returned home, his journey would not truly be over, that one final voyage still awaited him. He must take up an oar, simple, weathered, and carry it far inland. So far that he would reach a place where people had never seen the sea, where they would look upon the oar and ask, "What is that? A spoon?" Only then, only when he reached this strange land and offered peace, could he finally make amends with Poseidon, the god of the sea who had once raged against him. And only then would Odysseus be free to lay down his burdens at last. Some versions say that Odysseus obeyed the prophecy. He left Ithaca one final time, walking alone into lands distant and forgotten, places where the sea was only a myth, where salt was a stranger, and the idea of a ship existed only in the stories of dreamers. Across his shoulder he carried a worn, weather-beaten oar, the last relic of a life spent adrift. The villagers there looked upon him with puzzled eyes, as one might gaze at a madman wandering far from sense or purpose. Children giggled. The elders exchanged wary glances. But Odysseus paid no mind, he simply looked at them, quiet, calm, then drove the oar into the earth, like a sacred rite, and then he sat down, gently, without a word, without a sound, and he never rose again. There was no thunderclap, no furious storm, no divine chorus, no heroic fanfare, only a final breath, soft as a breeze across an empty field, like a river slowing to stillness in the height of summer. Time passed. And with it, the world wore away all trace of the man who had once carried the sea upon his back. The stories became local legend, of a strange wanderer who came, sat by the roadside, and died. No one knew his true name. No stone bore it. No statue honored him. No medals, no laurels. Only the faintest impression left behind, a curious tale passed from lips to ears, and an oar, still standing in the grass. But you, the one who stood there in his final moment, you remember, you felt the silence settle over that place like a soft, weightless blanket. You saw the oar planted deep in the soil, the sunlight filtering through the trees, a small bird alighting briefly on the handle. A child's hand reaching out to touch it, without understanding. And then everything quietly began to fade, but you don't forget, not tonight. You remember every place he passed, the fields of Troy stained red with war, the bellowing rage of a cyclops robbed of sight, the soft, dangerous hands of immortal women, the dry crunch of sand beneath his feet as he stepped, finally, across the threshold of home, after 20 long years. And in that stillness, you wonder, is peace truly the final destination of every journey, or is it the wandering, the endless, restless drifting, that is the true essence of life? You lift your head, there is no longer the sound of waves. No scent of salt upon the air, only the wind, moving through tall, dry grass, and the oar, old and alone, still standing in a land that has never seen the sea. And then, in that perfect silence, you realize something: the old trickster is gone, just as he always was, at the end of every tale ever told. But this time, perhaps, he's gone for good. A gentle wind stirs, carrying with it a faint chill that slips between the leaves, guiding you away from the damp embrace of the sea and gently drawing you inland, deeper and deeper into the heart of the vast, waiting land. The road before you unfolds like a painting of nature in its most rugged form, harsh, yet majestic. You pass through fields of parched earth, where deep, jagged cracks spider across the ground, lit starkly by the harsh sun overhead, as if the very sky sought to scorch all that dared to live. Here and there, small pools of standing water gleam faintly, scattered like tarnished mirrors, catching the dim light in this sweltering stillness. Ahead, bare hills rise and roll. Stripped of trees, dotted only with sparse clusters of reed and scrub. They sway gently in the breeze, rustling in whispers, soft, near-forgotten echoes from a time long past. Gone is the briny tang of the ocean air. In its place, the dry scent of dust and sun-baked soil, laced with something more elusive. Something sacred. An unnamed aroma, part earth, part time itself, lingering like the ghost of an ancient memory half buried beneath centuries. You are still on the land of ancient Greece, but now, you have journeyed deeper, into a quieter realm, a place where time no longer hurries, and the air itself seems to pause and listen. You continue walking, through groves of old olive trees. Their gnarled branches bent low with age, heavy with plump, black olives. The golden hour sunlight filters through the foliage, casting a silver sheen across their muted green leaves. The entire grove is touched by something dreamlike, part mournful, part enchanted. With every step, it feels as though you are counting down through the final chapters of a life once lived, each footfall echoing with unspoken memories and quiet thoughts. Then, just as the dusk deepens and the world begins to blur at its edges, you see it, a ruin. An ancient structure rising out of the twilight, a colonnade, long and solemn, its great stone pillars worn and softened by the weight of centuries. Moss clings to the cracks, and ivy coils in silence, as if nature itself has kept watch here for an age. These pillars have seen history pass, quietly recording triumphs and tragedies with every crumbling edge. Beyond the colonnade, deep in the encroaching shadow, something waits, a stone coffin, simple, unmoving, laid gently upon the earth. It rests in a hush so absolute, it feels as though even time itself stands still in reverence. There is no name, no voice, only silence, and something sacred pressing softly in the air around you. Tonight, you stand at the deathbed of one of the greatest figures in human history, Socrates. You are about to witness a moment that is at once simple and deeply profound. A death not marked by swords or arrows, not by wounds or cries of pain. No. This ending comes in the form of a small cup of poison. And a series of slow, deliberate words, calm, composed, and filled with a wisdom that seems far too vast for one life, Socrates is now an old man. No one knows exactly how old, but his hair has thinned, and deep lines have carved their way across a face shaped by years of thinking, questioning, and enduring. He resembles an old turtle, weathered, wise, carrying the weight of a long life upon his back. The voice that once echoed through the streets of Athens with endless, relentless questions is now softer, slower. Almost like an invitation. An invitation to ponder, together, the final truths before he quietly leaves this world. The trial is over. The sentence has been passed. And now, surrounded by warm hands and tearful eyes, friends, students, followers, Socrates prepares for the last dialogue of his life. It is a moment both humble and monumental, heavy with meaning, quiet yet unforgettable. History records that in the year 399 BCE, Socrates was sentenced to death by the city-state of Athens. The charges? Corrupting the youth and impiety, disrespecting the gods of the city. To many, these accusations may sound abstract or political. But at the time, Athens was trembling beneath the weight of recent wars and internal unrest. Socrates, with his constant questions and refusal to accept anything without reason, was seen as a danger. His words, his ideas, his influence, they challenged authority, and that challenge was too much for a fragile, wounded democracy to bear, so the city gave him a choice: exile or death by poison, and in the way only Socrates could, he chose death. To flee, to run, that would be to admit guilt. And Socrates refused to lie, not even to save his own life. More than that, he believed the soul was immortal. Death, to him, was not an end, but a transition, a quiet shift from one state of being to another. Not something to fear, but something to face with curiosity, with courage, and above all, with reason. You sit on the cold stone floor beside his worn wooden bed. The air around you carries the scent of limestone, coarse fabric, and the damp breath of ancient prison walls. His students, those who had followed him faithfully over the years, gather close in a quiet circle of devotion. Among them is Plato. Though later, Plato would claim he was not present that day due to illness. This sparks a quiet question in your heart: was he truly absent, or was it simply too much to bear, the final moment too heavy for even a philosopher to witness? But whether imagined or remembered, you see them here. Silent eyes trained on their beloved teacher, following him as he prepares to step into the next world. Socrates, ever composed, makes a few soft jokes, not for his own comfort, but for theirs. His words are gentle, like a father soothing frightened children. He explains, as he always has, that death is not something to be feared. Perhaps it is like a dreamless sleep, deep and restful. Or perhaps it is a great conversation with souls long past, the kind of dialogue he had always hoped for. Either way, it is not something terrible. Not an end, but a possibility. Then, a man enters the room and brings the cup of poison. There is a peculiar detail you can't look away from: the poison doesn't kill instantly. It works slowly, creeping upward through the body in silent procession. First, the feet go numb. Then the ankles. Then the legs. Little by little, life is pushed upward, until the chest, the center of breath, begins to fall quiet. No cries. No convulsions. Just stillness. Gradual, complete, inevitable. Socrates takes the cup with the same calmness one might take a cup of tea on a warm afternoon. He drinks it all. Then lies back on the bed, preparing for the final journey as if settling into sleep. The room falls into a silence so deep, it feels as if the air itself has paused. Even time seems to hold its breath, listening, waiting. For the last exhale. To this day, scholars debate the truth of that moment, the extraordinary calm, the final words. Some argue it was all the invention of Plato. A polished story shaped to immortalize the master as a symbol of wisdom and virtue. Perhaps, in reality, Socrates was frightened. Bitter. uncertain. But if that version ever existed, it was buried by time. What remains, what history has preserved, is the image of a man lifting the cup with a gentle smile, greeting death not with fear, but with clarity. And that moment, that quiet, composed ending, it sent a tremor through the history of human thought. The death of Socrates was not only a personal tragedy wrapped in silence. It was a martyrdom for reason, a defiant stand for questions, for truth, for the value of a life lived through examined belief. Above all, it was a lasting message of courage and intellect, whispered from the edge of existence itself. You sit quietly, watching the slow rhythm of Socrates' breath as the poison gently takes hold of him. His final words echo in the hushed chamber, a message, cryptic yet oddly light-hearted. He turns to a friend and says, "We owe a rooster to Asclepius. Don't forget to pay the debt." It sounds like a joke, but it's more than that. It's a prayer. A whisper of meaning. Asclepius, the Greek god of healing, represents restoration and rebirth. And in that final breath, Socrates still sees death not as a curse, but as a cure, a release from the illness of earthly suffering. A healing of the soul. You remain seated long after his last breath fades. His students are weeping, their tears falling freely now, no longer held back by hope or duty. And the sun, distant and unbothered, begins to sink behind the hills, staining the sky with a brilliant, burning orange. The world feels quieter. As if some vital tension has vanished. The voice that once questioned everything, the unshakable voice that refused to let truth sleep, is now silent. And that silence feels like an absence you didn't know could ache. As you rise and leave the prison room, one sentence loops endlessly in your mind: the unexamined life is not worth living. You walk slowly, along dusty roads worn smooth by countless feet. With each step, your old sandals stir a faint cloud of dust, rising behind you like faded echoes. And still the thought lingers: if you had just one moment alone with Socrates, what would he ask you? Would it be something deceptively simple, so quietly profound you'd find yourself unable to answer, and you understand then? The real question might not lie in something grand. No, it would be something so deeply human, so fundamentally impossible to resolve, that only Socrates could have thought to ask it, a question you'd carry with you for the rest of your life. Beneath a blazing sunset stretched across the horizon, the sun seems pressed flat against the edge of the earth, flattened like a great brass coin beneath a sheet of thick glass. Golden orange light spills endlessly in every direction, draping the world in an enchanted glow, at once tender and smoldering, soft and searing. The air around you thickens with heat and weight, clinging to your skin in a way that feels suffocating, as if the very sky itself is heavy with unspoken stories. It is nothing like the crisp breeze of Athens or the serene lands you've wandered through on your journey across Greece. No, this is not the land of gentle philosophers or noble warriors from fabled tales. This is the heart of an empire, a vast dominion that once ruled thousands of miles with ambition carved into stone and sand. The wind here carries the dry sting of desert dust, mingling with the smoky scent of campfires and the cold, biting edge of metal, so sharp and real it sends a shiver through your spine. Above you, the sky turns the deep shade of twilight purple, dark and strange. The kind of twilight that only empires know. The kind that comes just before the curtain falls. You are in Persia. Or more precisely, you stand on land that once pulsed as the beating heart of its greatest empire, now just a ghost of glory, its legacy fading like paint on ancient stone. In front of you is a great tent. Aged, weathered, yet still imposing, as though it carries the memory of countless conquests. The air here is thick with the heady aroma of spiced wine, mixed with the faintest trace of burning incense, a fragrance that barely masks the colder scent underneath. The sharp metallic tang, like a blade freshly washed in steel. It clings to everything, the fabric, the silence, even your breath. Inside that tent, in the stillness so dense it feels like time itself is hesitating, you are watching the final breaths of a man who was more than a king. He was a god in the eyes of many. this is Alexander the Great. He is no longer the immortal marble figure you've seen standing tall in museums, nor the polished war hero praised across the pages of history books. Alexander, now, is simply a young man, just 32 years old, frail, trembling, and drenched in sweat beneath layers of rough, faded linen. His once glorious curls hang in tangled strands around his gaunt face. His lips are cracked, parched beyond comfort, and his wide eyes, glassy and unfocused, seem to be searching through the mist of a fever that drags him closer and closer to the edge of death. Some say it was malaria. Others suspect typhoid fever. And still, whispers of poison swirl quietly among those who stand in shadows. Historians have debated for centuries the true cause of his death, but one thing is certain: Alexander the Great will never wake again. Inside the great tent, silence hangs heavy and suffocating, like a velvet curtain pulled tight around sorrow. It's the kind of silence that makes time itself seem reluctant to move. Along the edges of the space, his generals, men who marched beside him through scorching deserts and across frozen mountaintops, stand motionless, their broad shoulders held high, their faces carved from grief. These are the same warriors who had once watched Alexander tame the world. Not just with sword and shield, but with vision and determination that defied logic, distance, and fear. Now, all that strength, all that glory, vanishes quietly into the evening air, leaving only a still, terrible helplessness behind. Alexander was not just a king. He was a conqueror of worlds, of legends. From Greece to Egypt, beyond the fabled rivers of India, he had never known defeat. More than 20 cities bear his name, monuments to a legacy that burned like wildfire across 3 continents, reshaping history even before his beard had fully grown. But tonight, there are no armies, no drums, no cheering crowds. Only the low murmur of broken breaths. He mutters strange, fragmented words no one can understand, fading into the cold twilight that creeps into the corners of the tent. You lean closer, his body radiates a thin, fragile warmth, the last fading light of a once blazing sun. Someone gently tries to wet his cracked lips with wine. But he turns away. His hand trembles, as if gripping the reins of an invisible horse. As if, even now, he's riding across endless sand-drenched plains or crossing the sacred rivers of Babylon. Perhaps in his fevered mind, he's reliving the great campaigns. Perhaps he sees elephants charging forward, or ancient cities glowing with torchlight. Or maybe he sees nothing at all. Nothing but the dark and the ache, curling itself around each of his final, shallow breaths. Few people know this, but it's said that Alexander's body did not decay for many days after his death. His followers, already torn between grief and disbelief, saw it as a divine sign, proof that he was more than mortal. Not just a king, but a god. A sacred being, lifted above even death itself. Others have offered different explanations. Perhaps his organs shut down early, a side effect of something like West Nile virus or a rare autoimmune disease, creating the eerie illusion that his body was strangely preserved. But whether it was a miracle or a medical mystery, the outcome was the same. Alexander, once a man of flesh and blood, now slipped quickly into legend, becoming a symbol of immortality etched into the soul of humanity. And then the fighting began. Without a clear air, without so much as a will left behind, the vast empire Alexander had carved out, from the Mediterranean to the edges of India, began to shatter. His final breath had barely faded when the sharp steel of ambition took its place. The men closest to him, once bound by loyalty and brotherhood, now stood ready to carve the world apart with blades drawn not for their king, but for themselves. The empire cracked like glass dropped on stone. Egypt fell swiftly to Ptolemy. Macedonia split into rival factions. The eastern lands boiled over like milk left too long over fire. His generals, the same ones who had fought beside him, bled beside him, toasted victories beside him, now declared themselves kings. And in doing so, they became enemies. Through it all, Alexander's body remained, like a small, brilliant sun that had fallen from the sky, no longer shining, but still too sacred to touch, and yet, touch it they didn't just fight for land. They fought over him, over the remains of the man who had once united the known world. Some claimed his body was stolen on its journey home to Macedonia and diverted to Alexandria, the city that bore his name. Others whispered that it had been put on public display like a holy relic, worshipped like a god. Still others say it vanished, taken by Roman hands, or buried deep beneath desert sands. Even now, centuries later, historians still argue. No one knows for certain where the bones of the great king truly lie. As you step outside the tent, the air is still thick with dust and mourning. Behind you, the empire continues to unravel, not because it was weak, but because the only man mad enough to hold it together is now gone. There is a deep, tragic irony in conquering the entire world, only to be defeated by the frailty of one's own body. There was no battle, no thunder of hooves, just the quiet fever of illness and the cruel, silent march of time, a force no army has ever overcome. You turn for one last look, the tent flaps gently in the evening breeze. The young king does not stir, and somewhere far from Babylon, across rivers and deserts and sleeping cities, in a tiny village in Macedonia, a young boy dreams. He dreams of glory. He dreams of greatness. He dreams of one day becoming more than a man, and as history turns its next page, a new story is already beginning, strange, miraculous, and entirely unknown. The land before you is now cloaked in a lush, vibrant green, a stark contrast to the arid, desolate days of the past. It feels as though nature has just awakened from a long slumber, with life returning and spreading across every corner of this vast field. Large stones lie scattered beneath your feet, draped in a soft, damp layer of moss that forms a natural carpet, velvety and smooth beneath each step you take. The air around you is fresh and cool, with a crispness like the tender embrace of an autumn morning. It carries the earthy scent of damp soil newly quenched and the faint, fragile aroma of young grass just beginning to sprout after a long winter's sleep. A delicate layer of mist spreads across the plain, like a thin, ghostly veil unfurling slowly and gently, as if an invisible poison had just escaped from an ancient, mysterious vial. It clings to every fold of the land and sky, wrapping the landscape in an almost otherworldly beauty, ethereal, slightly eerie, yet utterly mesmerizing. From the distance, a bell tolls, low, mournful, and solitary. The sound slices through the thick morning fog, echoing far and wide like a summons from another realm, urging you forward with a pull too deep and ancient to resist. You follow the sound, each step heavy with unspoken thoughts and quiet reflections. Through patches of earth and clusters of trees, the scene gradually sharpens. At last, standing before you is an old monastery. Solemn, silent, and imposing in its solitude. Its aged towers lean ever so slightly, like elders bowed under the weight of centuries. Moss and the dust of time have settled thick upon each weathered stone, forming a hazy, enigmatic portrait of forgotten history. Every wall, every brick seems to whisper its own story of the years that have passed and secrets never told. Stepping inside, you're struck by the soft glow of flickering candlelight, small flames of spirit, flickering yet steadfast. Their warm shimmer dances across ancient statues of saints, bathing the chapel in a sacred stillness so profound it nearly steals your breath. In the dim corners, robed monks in long, dark garments whisper prayers in ancient Latin. Their thin, fragile figures bend slightly as their voices rise and fall in steady rhythm, weaving together into a quiet, haunting chant that lingers like incense in the vast hush of the chapel. Every sound feels reverent and restrained, as if even the air is careful not to disturb the sanctity of what is unfolding. At the heart of the chapel, upon a simple wooden bed that somehow radiates dignity and weight, lies a man. His body is still, but the story of his life burns more brightly and tragically than any epic ever written. His death shook the foundations of England, leaving behind a mark in history that has never faded. You are standing beside Thomas Becket, everything unfolded with brutal speed and horror. A sword flashed beneath the flickering candlelight of that bitter winter evening, raised high, then brought down, shattering the sacred silence of the cathedral. In that moment, history bore witness to one of its most tragic and merciless deaths, the death of a man in holy robes, a true martyr. There is a chilling tale, little known and rarely spoken aloud. According to legend, one of the 4 knights struck with such force that Thomas Becket's skull split open, and part of his brain spilled onto the cold stone floor, right near the steps leading to the altar. A loyal monk, it is said, rushed forward and gathered the fragments of brain tissue with a cloth, treating it as a holy relic. The image is enough to send shivers down anyone's spine, and is certainly not the sort of story to be told late at night. Becket's final words echoed through the cathedral like a solemn declaration, unforgettable in their resolve: "For the name of Jesus and the protection of the Church, I am ready to embrace death." Not a cry of despair, not a betrayal like Et2, brute. But a statement of strength and unwavering purpose, the words of a man who stood firm, ready to give his life for his faith and mission. After his death, the story of Thomas Becket began to feel as though it had leapt straight from the pages of the Bible. The news spread quickly, inspiring many with its message of spiritual courage and the steep cost of loyalty. Within just 2 years, he was canonized by the Pope, becoming an immortal symbol of sacrifice and conviction. Miraculous events and healing wonders were soon reported at his tomb, and the tales spread far and wide, drawing pilgrims from across Europe, walking barefoot, kneeling, bringing with them unwavering faith and profound reverence. His murderers were not only excommunicated by the Church but also subjected to public and severe punishment. They were forced to walk barefoot to the cathedral and be scourged in front of Becket's tomb, a grim ritual of penance. Even King Henry II could not escape the deep spiritual and political consequences of his friend's death. He, too, knelt before the altar, wearing a coarse hairshirt, submitting to lashes from the monks, a dramatic act of repentance steeped in the traditions of the Middle Ages. Marking his sorrow, guilt, and the heavy price of a broken friendship, and yet, to this day, scholars continue to debate the true nature of Thomas Becket's resolve and defiance. Was he merely a spiritual martyr, unwavering in his ideals? Or was he a shrewd political figure, carefully calculating his defiance to challenge royal authority and expand the Church's influence? The blurry line between saint and political agitator remains unresolved, a tension history has never fully settled. What cannot be denied is that his legacy is deeply etched into the history and culture of Europe. Thomas Becket's tomb became one of the most renowned pilgrimage sites of the Middle Ages, drawing thousands each year. You might recall Geoffrey Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, in which the journey begins at the very shrine once stained by the blood of this martyred archbishop. You walk through the restored cathedral, each weathered stone seeming to whisper stories of time, sacrifice, and unshakable faith. Light filters through stained glass windows, casting vivid colors across the cold stone floor, dancing at your feet, reflecting the enduring image of a great martyr. Everything is strangely silent, save for a single small candle flickering quietly near the place where Becket once fell. No prayers are chanted now, only that faint flame remains, delicate yet warm, glowing softly in the hush of remembrance. As you step out of the chapel, a thought strikes you: Thomas Becket never truly wanted to become archbishop. It was King Henry II who pleaded, persuaded, and pressed him to take up that mantle. Sometimes, the roles that alter the course of history are not those we choose, but those we are burdened with, roles that come with a cost far greater than personal freedom. That, too, is sacrifice, the unwilling crown, the uncompromising stand, and a legacy forged through conflict, sorrow, and unyielding strength. Outside, a light rain begins to fall, cold, clear, and quiet, like the tears of the earth itself. The monastery bell tolls twice, low and slow, resonating through the stillness. Somewhere, in a quiet, distant corner, someone lights a new candle, continuing the flame of remembrance for a martyr no one can forget. Thomas Becket, the steadfast priest who stood firm in the storm, has become an immortal saint in the chronicles of history, and in the hearts of millions. The rain had just ceased, but the atmosphere around you shifted instantly, no longer the cool, refreshing purity that often follows a gentle downpour. Instead, you sense something dense, heavy, and unsettling creeping into the air, cloaking the surroundings like a dark, mysterious veil. A thick, acrid smoke began to seep into every crack of the world around you, curling around your body like some invisible beast, slowly claiming everything in its path. This was no delicate morning mist, no soft veil of dew rising with the dawn. This smoke was hot, pungent, suffocating, so harsh that each breath felt like a struggle. The very air seemed to close in around your chest, pressing down with invisible weight, refusing you the luxury of a single sigh of relief. Your cloak clung to you, damp and heavy, the fabric seemingly drawn inward as if caught in the grip of some swirling, black vortex. You realize then, you are no longer in the warm, solemn stillness of the cathedral. Now, you are standing in a vast square, so wide it makes you feel small and lost in its immensity. The scene before you is the opposite of the sacred silence you left behind. Everything here is frantic, chaotic, bursting with unruly energy, a vivid painting of unrest and motion. All around you are old timbered houses, their low-leaning roofs and tiny shuttered windows peering out like cold, watchful eyes. They seem to follow your every step, making you feel relentlessly observed. Crowds have gathered, tightly packed and restless. Voices shout, cry, laugh, blending into a mad symphony of rhythm and noise. French and Latin overlap and collide, forming a tangled river of sound too complex to untangle. And at the very center of it all, your gaze locks onto a sight you cannot look away from, a young woman bound tightly to a crude wooden stake. She wears a suit of armor, dull and faded with time, her face marked not with fear but with a strange, radiant strength. Her eyes burn with defiance, unwavering and luminous, challenging the very world around her. This is the moment. The historic execution of Jeanne d'Arc, Joan of Arc, the young maiden who rose from obscurity to become a warrior, a visionary, and now, an unshakable symbol of faith and unyielding will, in the year 1431, in the city of Rouen, the capital of Normandy, during the tumultuous 100 Years' War between England and France. A war soaked in blood and dragging on for nearly a century, stood Jeanne d'Arc. Barefoot, bruised, her body bearing the marks of brutal imprisonment and relentless torture, she held her head high, a blazing faith in her eyes that no force on earth could extinguish. She was more than a warrior, more than a hero, she was the embodiment of perseverance and unshakable belief during one of the darkest chapters in European history. Jeanne had claimed to hear the voice of God, a divine command urging her to rise and lead France against the invading English forces. Her story is a living legend of extraordinary willpower. With what many believe to be holy guidance, she led the French army through stunning victories at a time when morale was at its lowest. It was Jeanne who played a decisive role in lifting the siege of Orleans, a turning point that paved the way for Charles VII to be crowned King of France, laying the foundation for the country's revival. All of this, impossibly, was achieved by a young girl, a peasant with no formal military training, yet driven by a belief so fierce, so immovable, that it inspired a nation. You walk slowly, your steps heavy, toward the wooden pyre erected in the center of the square. The executioner stands nearby, his face cold, devoid of emotion, waiting for the fateful moment to arrive. Jeanne, smaller and frilier than you had imagined, stands bound to the stake. Her hair is cropped short like that of a monk, her hands tightly tied behind her back. Yet her expression is one of remarkable resolve, almost defiant in its serenity. She had endured savage interrogations, forced confessions in a sham trial steeped in injustice, a court where every word she spoke was twisted into accusations of heresy. Among the charges brought against her were witchcraft, false prophecy, and one act considered gravely sinful by the standards of the time, wearing men's clothing. One detail that few notice, yet proved pivotal in Jeanne's conviction, was her choice to wear male clothing. Historians continue to debate the true reason behind this act. Some argue that Jeanne dressed as a man to protect herself in prison, shielding her from violence and humiliation at the hands of her jailers. Others believe it was simply a matter of practicality and necessity under the harsh conditions of her confinement. Whatever the reason, the church tribunal at the time deemed this a grave repeat offense, serious enough under its rigid laws to justify a death sentence. The fire was lit with solemn deliberation. At first, only faint flickers emerged, small, hesitant flames crackling over damp kindling, producing sharp pops and a sizzle in the morning air. But soon the flames roared to life, erupting with brutal, merciless force. You can smell the acrid scent of burning pitch, the sharp tang of smoldering bark filling your nostrils and tightening your throat. Jean lifted her eyes to the sky. She did not look around. Instead, she called out Jesus, again and again, a final prayer from the depths of her soul. Eyewitnesses later claimed that her voice, trembling with devotion, rose higher than the roaring flames that consumed her, echoing with the undying strength of unshakable faith. Some say they saw a white dove rise from the smoke, the soul of Jean, pure and free, taking flight into the heavens. Others believe that her heart did not burn, even as the rest of her body turned to ash. These tales, though doubted by scholars as products of emotion or myth-making, continue to live on in memory and spirit. In such chaotic times, symbols and meaning often reached further and lingered longer than cold, unforgiving truth ever could. It is undeniable, Jean was only 19 when she was burned alive before the eyes of a vast crowd, a crowd that could not look away. You feel the heat lightly licking at your ankles, even from a distance. You see a bishop standing nearby. His face expressionless, cold. The soldiers are silent, unmoving, like statues of stone. As the fire died down, Jean's body was burned 2 more times to ensure that not a single fragment of her remained. Her ashes were thrown into the gentle waters of the Seine, a desperate attempt to erase the last traces of her from the world, but martyrs tend to leave marks that can never be erased from history. 25 years later, the church reopened her case and overturned the original verdict. Centuries passed, and Jean was canonized, becoming a saint, a national icon, a symbol of unwavering faith and unbreakable pride. Jeanne d'Arc was even made into an action figure, a strange but striking testament to the depth and reach of her legacy around the globe. Still, scholars continue to argue. Did Jean truly hear divine voices? Or was she merely a pawn in the midst of a chaotic political war? Was the voice she claimed to hear truly the voice of God, or the product of mental strain, spiritual trauma, or religious fervor? The records that remain are fragmented, inconsistent, and largely second-hand. Yet no one can deny the lasting power of her story, or her place in the great river of history. You leave Rouen, walking slowly through the dissolving crowd. The smoke still clings to the air, the scent of fire and ash lingering like a shadow. In your mind, you hear a voice, soft, but steady. A whisper cutting through the centuries like a blade of truth, go forward, with courage. And you wonder, what does it feel like to believe in something so deeply that you would give your life for it? Could you find that strength in your own darkest hour? The noisy, chaotic sounds of the medieval square slowly fade behind you, giving way to the salt-laden breeze of the open sea, mingling with the creaking of aged wood beneath your feet each time you step onto the deck. Your eyes stay fixed ahead, toward the endless expanse of the ocean, stretching as far as the eye can see, its surface shimmering with a cold silver gleam under the dim light of a storm-laden sky. You're no longer standing on solid ground. You're now aboard a mighty Spanish warship, a vessel grandly outfitted, fortified, and ready for brutal, decisive naval battles, and in this moment, you are about to witness something extraordinary, at once grand and chaotic, a death so strange and rare that it would go on to change the laws of maritime tradition forever. You are standing beside Sir Francis Drake, more precisely, you are near him, close enough to observe, but instinctively aware that a respectful distance is necessary. For deaths in history are rarely solemn or romantic, despite what legend might suggest. This one is no exception. What's about to unfold is a death marked by confusion, disorder, and absurdity, yet one steeped in symbolism, etched deep into the annals of time. in the year 1596, off the vast coast of Portobello in present-day Panama, the great English hero, the man who once struck fear into the heart of the Spanish Empire, now faced an enemy far more insidious than any he had battled before. It was not the roar of cannons, nor the clash of blades in a pirate's skirmish. It was dysentery, a merciless disease that had claimed the lives of thousands of sailors, soldiers, and settlers across centuries. It brought no glory, no fanfare, only agony and decline. And yet, its cruelty was undeniable. Francis Drake was the first Englishman ever to circumnavigate the globe by sea. He struck the Spanish fleets with such precision and daring that piracy itself seemed to transform into a patriotic mission. Queen Elizabeth I had once knighted him on the deck of his ship, treating him as a national treasure. He was a living legend of the high seas, commander of hundreds of bold raids, the keeper of more hidden treasures than any map could ever capture. And yet now, beneath the pouring rain and biting ocean wind, he lay curled up in the cabin of his ship, wrapped in a blanket soaked with sweat, his strength slipping away so quickly it was heartbreaking to witness. Outside his cabin, the sailors whispered urgently among themselves, exchanging remedies ranging from rare medicinal herbs to desperate prayers. Some even placed leeches upon his skin, believing it might draw out the sickness and save the great knight, but nothing worked. Drake's body trembled with relentless chills and stabbing abdominal cramps, as if he were being tortured from within. The faint moans from his cracked lips were too fragile for anyone to bear hearing. In the dim shadows of the ship's cabin, lit only by the faintest light slipping through the wooden slats, there was nothing left to do but wait for the inevitable, and then, the story took a strange and deeply symbolic turn. As death crept closer, Francis Drake made an extraordinary request. He asked to be dressed in full armor, from head to toe, in his final moments, and to be buried at sea in a sturdy, lead-lined coffin sunk deep beneath the waves. This was not a standard sailor's burial. It wasn't something easily understood or accepted by those around him. But Francis Drake, even on his deathbed, clung to his identity with unwavering pride. He refused to leave quietly or simply. He wished to leave behind a final impression, that of an unbroken warrior. Though confused and surprised by his request, the crew ultimately honored the last wish of their mighty knight. You stand silently at the edge of the deck as his body is carried toward the water. Heavy raindrops slick the wooden planks beneath your feet. The ship's lanterns flicker, casting sharp, fleeting reflections upon his cold steel armor, gleaming like a monument carved from the storm itself. The weighty coffin slowly slides off the edge of the ship, falling into the sea with solemn gravity, pulled down by the mass of metal and the vast legacy of the man encased within. It sinks, deeper and deeper, vanishing into the cold, endless waters, swallowed by the immense silence of the Caribbean. To this day, historians continue to debate the exact location of Francis Drake's final resting place. Some believe that time and the sea have long since swallowed the coffin whole, dissolving it into the coral reefs and deep layers of ocean sand. Countless treasure hunters have scoured these waters for years, hoping to uncover some trace of the great hero, but none have ever succeeded. Still, you don't need precise GPS coordinates to feel the full weight and meaning of that moment. It's as if the sea itself understood the gravity of what was happening. For just a breath, the wind stilled, bowing its head in reverence for the passing of a mighty man. The death of Francis Drake stands as a striking paradox. One that even the least observant cannot ignore, a man who once faced down tempests, mutinies, and the powerful fleets of Spain was ultimately defeated by an invisible, microscopic foe. A bacterium. It's a sobering reminder that nature has never cared for rank, glory, or the pride of humankind. As the ship turns northward, bound for England without its hero aboard, you see the flag flying at half-mast, fluttering solemnly in the wind. The sailors stand silent, hands gripping the rigging and railings, the grief and reverence etched into their faces. Below deck, Drake's old maps remain rolled up, stained with ink and sweat, documents that held not just coordinates, but dreams, journeys, and a legacy that refused to fade. yet the story of Francis Drake never truly ended here. Generations of sailors and captains continued to speak his name like a code whispered across the waves, a reminder that the English had once, and might again, command the vast oceans. They passed down the tale of the man who threw himself into the unknown seas, embraced death, yet never surrendered his hunger for glory and freedom. You glance back one last time, imagining the coffin as it drifted slowly into the deep, now lying still amid the cold mud and soft sand. There is no gravestone, no grand monument. Only the vast stillness of the ocean, and a sacred anonymity that only the sea can bestow. A storm is coming. The sails snap taut in the rising wind, stronger than ever. And ahead of you, history rolls onward, pulled forward by those with fierce ambition, who dare to challenge the tides and outlast even death, just as Francis Drake once did. The ship slowly pulls away from the dock, inching back bit by bit, as if yielding to an entirely different realm, a world saturated with memory and emotion, heavy and heady, like the searing, blistering air of an endless desert. Right now, you feel each tiny grain of sand clinging to your skin, dry and smooth, yet carrying an unrelenting, merciless sting. The sand lashes your face like fine, sharp needles, each gust embedding slivers of burning grit into your eyelashes, catching the light like crushed glass under the unforgiving sun. Overhead, the sky burns so fiercely white that your eyes instinctively squint, scorched by a blazing flame that shows no trace of mercy or compassion. This is no place for gentleness or peace. On the contrary, this land is cruel, punishing, and unforgiving, just like the tragic fate it is about to witness, one of the most mysterious and hotly debated deaths in all of human history. You lift a hand to your brow, squinting hard to shield your eyes from the blazing sun, then look ahead, following the final footprints of a man who once conquered vast swathes of the known world. A man who came to embody absolute power and limitless ambition, Alexander the Great, in 323 BCE, Babylon. Burned beneath the scorching heat of the desert sun. It was a magnificent city, a jewel of the ancient world, where soldiers, statesmen, scholars, and mercenaries from every corner of the empire gathered in awe. All of them drawn to a single figure, a man who had reshaped the map of the world in a way no one before him had ever done. Alexander, then only 32 years old, had forged an empire stretching from the storied cities of ancient Greece, through the wealth and grandeur of Egypt, across the mighty Persian Empire, and all the way to the distant borders of India. Now, the great conqueror lay dying, clinging to life, moment by moment. According to historical records, the decline began after a lavish banquet, overflowing with wine and rich food. Soon afterward, Alexander was gripped by a violent fever. The following days were a slow unraveling. His strength ebbed away, his voice faded to a whisper, his limbs turned cold, and his body was racked with relentless waves of pain. And yet, he remained lucid until the very end, clear-headed enough to whisper his final words to his most trusted generals. Or at least, that's what legend tells us, a misty wave of story passed down through the millennia, woven tightly with both truth and myth that no one can fully untangle. Who will inherit the empire? One of his closest generals asked in the stillness of that dim room. Broken only by the ragged breaths of a dying man, the reply, scattered across centuries of varying records, became a riddle for the ages, to the strongest. Or perhaps, to Crateros, his most loyal general. But in truth, no one knows for certain what Alexander's final words really were. Some even speculate he said nothing at all. Everything is cloaked in the haze of time, wrapped in the eternal mystery of legend. The only thing certain is that Alexander's death marked the beginning of a period of chaos unlike anything seen before in history. His generals, known as the Diadochi, began dividing up the vast territories he had conquered, dragging the great empire into a whirlpool of war, betrayal, and fragmentation. But before continuing with the tale of that disintegration, pause for a moment at one strange and haunting detail. According to some ancient sources, Alexander's body showed no signs of decay for 6 full days after his death. To the ancient Greeks, this was seen as a divine sign, proof of immortality or sanctification. But under the light of modern science, that detail hints at another, far less mythical possibility: perhaps Alexander hadn't actually died yet. Yes, this is not mere legend, but a serious hypothesis that has been considered by several researchers. Some believe he may have suffered from a rare condition known as Guillain-Barré syndrome, which can cause paralysis and a loss of speech and motor function, all while leaving the mind fully conscious. It's possible that Alexander lay motionless, nearly comatose in a cooling room, while physicians, priests, and close companions debated treatments, and everyone around him believed he was already dead. Let that thought slowly soak into your mind. You are standing now in that grand hall, surrounded by towering walls clad in solid gold and shimmering lapis lazuli, the dim light reflecting off them to create a fine, veiled mist that hangs in the air like a silent mystery. The scent of thick incense curls in the stillness, making the room feel almost suffocating with tension, so heavy you can feel it pressing down on every breath you take. Within this space, you hear faint whispers, quiet, cautious voices behind thick curtains. These are not prayers for the departed, but the hushed calculations of power, the quiet unfolding of ambition. The king teeters between life and death. The throne waits. But who, truly, is worthy of claiming it? There is no clear successor. No sign of what the future holds. Only a dense, uncertain silence, and you come to recognize a profound paradox: Alexander the Great had conquered nearly every part of the known world. But he never conquered the one thing that truly mattered most: the succession of his throne. The moment he passed, that vast empire began to unravel. His generals fought for dominance. Territories were divided, then divided again through wars that dragged on for decades. His young wife and infant son could not escape the ruthless tide of political upheaval and were eventually murdered. Alexander's legacy remained immense, his influence echoing through generations, but the empire he left behind did not endure. You walk among the warriors who had once followed him through ferocious battles, across deep rivers and towering mountains, facing war elephants and colossal armies in the distant lands of India. Now, they stand in silence, their eyes heavy with sorrow, watching their god-king slowly dissolve into the current of history. The image of Alexander lives on, not only in stories, legends, or the gleam of polished marble statues, but in the whispers passed from place to place, in the hearts of admirers, and in the generations that followed. Many theories swirl around his death. Some believe he was poisoned, perhaps by those closest to him, or by hidden enemies. Others claim he succumbed to malaria, typhoid, or a mysterious concoction of strong wine and exotic herbs. His body, it is said, was stolen on its journey back to Macedonia and rerouted to Egypt, where Ptolemy, one of his most loyal generals, built a magnificent tomb in Alexandria to house the king-turned-pharaoh. But where is that tomb? It remains an unsolved mystery. The final resting place of Alexander has vanished into the mist of time. Napoleon once searched for it, archaeologists have dug tirelessly, and treasure hunters still wander in hope. Scholars debate endlessly: was the tomb looted, swallowed by the sea, or simply buried beneath layers of earth, lost to memory? You walk through golden dunes, perhaps somewhere near Alexandria, trying to picture a tomb that once drew the attention of emperors, now lost without a trace. The air around you feels thick, stifling, as if all of ancient history has wrapped itself around you like an invisible shroud. You wonder if beneath your very feet there might lie a coffin coated in the dust of centuries, forgotten between stories and legends, a relic silently witnessing each turn of the historical wheel. And perhaps, just perhaps, Alexander the Great still watches from some far-off realm. Not from the mythic heights of Olympus, nor from the majestic temples of Babylon, but from another plane altogether, a place deeper, stranger, and more enduring than even the brightest marble or most whispered tale, a place that only time, in its infinite reach, can ever truly touch. The hot sand beneath your feet slowly gives way to cold, sharp slabs of stone, silent, unmoving witnesses to a bygone age. Around you, unfamiliar footsteps echo, not your own, carrying a sense of mystery and foreboding, like the deep reverberations of a dark past. In the distance, a bell tolls slowly, solemnly, its mournful rhythm filling the air, mingling with the flickering torchlight dancing across moss-covered stone walls. The scene before you is both still and heavy, steeped in a melancholy that defies words. You are no longer standing on open ground but seem instead to have descended deep into the earth, into the very foundations, firm and frigid, of the once mighty Roman Empire. The air is thick with the scent of half-burnt candle wax, mixed with the musty damp of ancient stonework that has stood for centuries. You can feel the breath of history itself exhaling around you, slow and weighty. A figure appears ahead, moving with cautious, deliberate steps, radiating the pensive stillness of a philosopher in his final moments, his heart burdened by the inescapable weight of a cruel and unrelenting fate. You are witnessing the last moments of a brilliant thinker, not in classical Athens, as many might imagine, but in the very heart of imperial Rome at its peak. This is the death of Lucius Annaeus Seneca, known more widely as Seneca the Younger, the great teacher, loyal advisor, and profound confidant of Emperor Nero. Now, you bear witness to the tragic end of a life that had always stood at the intersection of philosophy and politics, elevated and noble on the one hand, tangled in the ruthless intrigues of the imperial court on the other. In the year 65 AD, the Roman Empire was suffocating under a cloud of suspicion and paranoia, cast by the increasingly unstable Emperor Nero, a man of complex ambition, enraptured by music and art, yet prone to violent and uncontrollable outbursts. Nero was a dreamer on the stage of power, but also a merciless tyrant who would not hesitate to eliminate anyone he perceived as a threat to his throne. And today, the name on his death list was none other than Seneca, the once trusted advisor, intimate companion, the man who had helped steer the empire and penned historic speeches that shaped its legacy. According to historical accounts, Seneca was a Stoic philosopher, famed for his teachings on reason, self-discipline, and the serene acceptance of fate. For years, he had walked a delicate line, trying to uphold a life of moral clarity while navigating the treacherous waters of Roman palace politics. He was like a master juggler, tossing knives with elegance while balancing on the ever-turning treadmill of imperial power. But no matter how skilled he was, no performance can last forever. Eventually, destiny called his name. A failed plot to assassinate the emperor, known as the Pisonian conspiracy, was swiftly uncovered in the chaos and paranoia that gripped the imperial court. In the wave of suspicion and betrayal that followed, Seneca's name, too, was dragged into the fire. Was he truly involved in the conspiracy? This remains one of the most hotly debated questions among historians to this day. Some argue that Seneca was complicit, or at the very least aware of the plot and chose not to intervene. Others believe that Nero merely seized the opportunity to eliminate a man who had grown into a powerful moral and intellectual counterweight to his own authority. Whatever the truth may be, the sentence was passed: Seneca was to die. But it would be a voluntary death, a death that preserved the dignity of a Roman nobleman to the very end. Seneca chose to end his life by suicide, a method regarded in Roman tradition as an honorable and noble way to die. Yet suicide in ancient Roman society was rarely gentle or quick. On the contrary, it was often a drawn-out tragedy, bloody, painful, accompanied by farewell speeches, poems, and the raw weight of final confessions. Seneca's death was no exception. Now you see him seated in a warm bath, his hand gently drawing a blade across his veins so that the blood could slowly drain, a common practice at the time to ease pain and promote circulation during the body's final retreat from life. Beside him was his wife, Paulina, a woman of unwavering loyalty, who, out of love and devotion, attempted to take her life alongside him. But even in the face of death, Seneca ordered that she be saved. He refused to let her die with him. The effort succeeded, and Paulina survived, though in a gravely weakened state. Seneca, however, was not granted a peaceful passing. His blood flowed too slowly. His aging body could no longer respond swiftly, and the process of dying stretched on, marred by agony. To hasten the end, he drank hemlock, the same poison once used to end the life of the great Socrates. Yet even this did not bring him swift relief. Finally, Seneca was carried into a room filled with suffocating steam, an attempt to quicken death through asphyxiation, a final effort to allow him to depart with dignity. To fulfill the sentence with honor. In those final moments, his voice still rang out clearly. Though hoarse, it was calm and steady, as he recited the teachings of Stoicism between ragged breaths. He urged his students to face death with reason and courage, to conquer fear, and to live in such a way that when the final hour arrived, there would be nothing left to dread or regret. The room fell silent, so quiet that only the drip of water could be heard, the soft rustling of fabric, and, from time to time, the faint stifled sobs of attendants struggling to hold back their tears. It was a strange and powerful kind of courage, to turn one's own departure into a final lesson, to leave behind a model of noble death for future generations. Despite the anguish and tragedy that surrounded it, and yet, Seneca's legacy has always been a subject of heated debate. Was he truly a genuine Stoic philosopher, living according to the ideals he so eloquently preached? Or was he merely a moralist cloaked in high rhetoric, masking deeper personal ambition? He taught simplicity and restraint, yet amassed enormous wealth. He spoke of self-discipline and virtue, yet played a part in helping Nero ascend the throne. Some revere him as a philosophical martyr, while others see a cunning and bitter statesman, one who knew too much, too late, to change the course of his own fate. You feel the cold, slippery marble beneath your feet. The torch beside you flickers, then dies, leaving a void of thick, endless darkness, vast and breathless. Seneca's final breath becomes a whisper, and then disappears into the silence, but his works do not die with him. His letters, essays, and Stoic reflections continue to inspire generations of thinkers, from the Renaissance to those who seek mindful living today. His final moment became a symbol of honorable death, even if the reality was neither peaceful nor easy. You follow the dim glow left by that legacy, stepping backward through the long, echoing corridors, and return to the open space of the Roman night. Overhead, the stars scatter across the sky like ancient truths, shining down upon the sturdy stone columns that refuse to fall. In the distance, on a faraway hill, you know that Nero plucks at his lyre, unmoved by the tragedies unraveling beneath his rule, but here, beneath moss-covered arches and within the stillness of old courtyards, a quiet voice continues to echo through time. Even a philosopher must sometimes bleed. The faint glow of torches from the Roman city has now receded into the distance, giving way to an entirely different scene, one of cold, utter stillness. The worn boots on your feet trudge slowly through the thick, soaking snow, so icy and saturated that it seeps through even the thick woolen socks you've wrapped tightly in a desperate attempt to stay warm. The air around you is cloaked in a biting frost that cuts through skin and burrows into bone, making you acutely aware of every shiver that racks your body. Above, the sky fades into an ashen gray, like a heavy curtain slowly descending, ready to swallow the last dim rays of daylight. The wind howls through leafless branches, carrying with it the acrid stench of smoke mingled with the cold tang of metal and a faint, unsettling scent lingering in the air, the smell of fresh blood, of death not yet faded, and a pain still raw, impossible to forget. You are standing in the frigid Alps, on the front lines of one of the most devastating and harrowing tragedies in world history, the catastrophic retreat of Napoleon's Grand Army from Russia in 1812. A brutal winter had descended, imprisoning every step of tens of thousands of soldiers in a vortex of ice, hunger, and bottomless despair. Each movement forward was a battle for survival, not just against a merciless nature, but against death itself, drawing closer with every breath. The faint groans, the emaciated figures dragging themselves across the snow-blanketed ground, etch into your mind an image of horror that refuses to fade. One undeniable historical truth continues to astonish: Napoleon had set out with over 600,000 men, burning with ambition, faith in victory, and dreams of glory. But by the end of the campaign, fewer than 100,000 returned with their bodies intact and the strength to reach home. This was not merely a tactical defeat, it was a logistical catastrophe of monumental proportions, cloaked in the ashes of a burning Moscow, in the endless days of retreat under skin-splitting frost, and in the quiet vanishing of countless souls beneath the endless white of snow. Amid this landscape of ruin, one name is still spoken with particular reverence, not because of grand heroics or tragic legend, but because of a truth so bitter and stark that it chills the heart. It is the name of General Charles-Étienne Gudin de la Sablonnière, one of Napoleon's most trusted and heavily relied upon commanders, a man who stood by the emperor through countless grueling campaigns. His loyalty and unwavering resolve never faltered, even as storms and peril engulfed every step of his journey, yet it was during the bloody battle at Valutino, when the retreat descended into chaos and disorder, that a cold, merciless cannonball tore through his right leg, severing it entirely, while severely mangling the other. It was a horrific catastrophe, one that could have crushed even the most resilient warrior. A wound beyond recovery amid the brutal conditions of a winter-ravaged battlefield. But the miracle was not in the wound. It was in the general's extraordinary resilience. Despite his grievous injuries, abandoned in a makeshift shelter deep in the frozen forest with no painkillers, no anesthesia, and barely any medical aid, Gudin remained conscious, alert, and unshakably composed. He continued to issue orders to his soldiers, insisting on discipline, resisting the pull of panic, and maintaining his role as a leader in the darkest hours imaginable. That strength, beyond physical endurance, became a living testament to human willpower and defiance in the face of merciless adversity. He survived for 3 more days, enduring waves of agonizing pain, surrounded by snow-blanketed silence and the numb dampness of icy blankets pressed against his frail skin. Around him, bitter yet tender laughter echoed from his comrades, soldiers huddled together in solidarity, trying to preserve slivers of warmth and humanity. Death approached slowly, relentlessly, like an enemy unwilling to strike cleanly, each hour spreading infection and decay, each breath a greater burden. You can almost imagine those final moments, the searing pain tearing through his body, but his spirit remaining fierce and unbroken, refusing to bow to the cruelty of fate. News of Gudin's death swiftly reached Napoleon, a man as complex as he was brilliant, cold in judgment yet not untouched by emotion. Legend has it that upon hearing of the passing of his childhood friend and comrade in arms, the emperor wept. A rare moment in which the mask of iron slipped, revealing raw grief and profound loss. He ordered a national mourning in Gudin's honor, even though the army was already depleted, starving, and lacking the means to conduct a proper funeral. Instead of a traditional burial, a unique ritual marked by the Napoleonic era was carried out. Gudin's body was cremated there on the unforgiving Russian soil, while his heart was carefully preserved in a small metal urn and transported back to France with honor and solemn ceremony. The rest of him, his worn, broken remains, was left behind, buried in the frozen earth of a foreign land, becoming a symbol of sacrifice and sorrow. To this day, historians continue to debate Napoleon's true emotions toward his fallen friend. Were those tears genuine expressions of grief? Or were they a calculated gesture, a performance to preserve the loyalty of troops whose morale was crumbling? Did Napoleon cry for a man? Or for the symbol that man had become, of loyalty, of empire, of the tragic unraveling of imperial dreams? But the story does not end there. In 2019, in the city of Smolensk, the remains of General Gudin were finally discovered after more than 2 centuries lost to time. Thanks to remarkable advances in modern science, archaeologists were able to confirm the identity of the legendary general through DNA analysis and the telltale evidence of his missing leg. In an emotional journey through time, his remains were brought back to France, where he was at last given a solemn funeral, a ceremony he had waited over 200 years to receive. It was a belated, yet deeply meaningful tribute to a military campaign long regarded as one of the greatest failures in modern warfare. Now, as you stand amidst the snow-covered wilderness of Russia, with no shelter in sight, no firewood, no food, only faint footprints trailing across the snow before vanishing into the bitter wind, you realize you are not on a battlefield of clashing swords and cannon fire. You are standing on a slow-moving cemetery, where death comes quietly, coldly, devouring even the strongest spirits. Through the howling of the wind against the bare branches, you can almost hear the faint sighs of French soldiers imprisoned by hunger and freezing air. Many wrapped themselves in stolen rugs, trembling as they clung to life by eating horsemeat, or anything else they could find. Some walked barefoot through the snow, others dragged the feeble bodies of their comrades on sleds cobbled together from shattered doors. And some simply sat down, and never got up again. The retreat from Moscow was not merely a military withdrawal. It was a humanitarian catastrophe, a tragedy of human endurance unrivaled in the annals of warfare. Death came not by bullet or explosion, but by cold, hunger, disease, and utter despair, and General Gudin. He was just one small story among thousands lost to time, one name in an endless list of the fallen. Yet somehow, with his amputated legs and broken body, he became a haunting symbol of those who followed Napoleon to the very edge of ruin. You keep trudging forward through the ever-thickening snow. Around you, the sky seems to collapse into a pitch-black night. Behind you, the flickering flames of a burned-out wagon glow faintly, one tiny point of light in the overwhelming cold. Ahead of you lies nothing but silence, desolation, and death, lurking just beyond reach, because this was not merely the retreat of an army, it was the disintegration, the eternal freezing, of a mighty empire. Your breath begins to crystallize into drifting trails of white mist as you step out from the thick fog, where the Russian snowstorm still howls violently behind you. With every inhale, the razor-sharp air slices into your throat like a blade, leaving behind a sting that cuts to the bone. With every exhale, vapor rises from your lips as thin wisps of white smoke, flickering like wandering souls adrift in the frozen wild. Snow blinds your vision, stretching endlessly in every direction, cruelly white. The wind creeps through the seams of your coat, slips into the crevices of your ears, like the bitter whispers of fallen soldiers forgotten amidst the desolation. Your boots sink deep into the heavy snow, each step pressing down on a graveyard of memories, where time once froze still in the madness of war, and then, suddenly, everything vanishes. In the blink of an eye, the brutal cold and ashen skies of Russia blur and fade like a frigid dream dissolving in the morning mist. The world around you begins to shift, slowly but surely, as though someone is repainting reality with an entirely new palette. The bone-chilling frost gives way to a sweltering, suffocating heat rising from the ground. The air grows dense, so thick and humid it seems it might drip into your hands. Each breath is no longer clean and crisp, but a slow, smoldering drag, dense, clinging, wrapping itself around your throat like a cobweb snaring prey. You've stepped into another world, not one forged by light and order, but by primal chaos, where plants rule supreme and life thrives without ever needing humankind. The Amazon rainforest unfurls before you like a colossal, breathing creature, pulsing and stretching toward you, as if you are no more than a speck of dust caught in its vast, living body. Light here is swallowed gradually by the canopy above, filtered through thick layers of leaves, leaving only a few faint streaks that shimmer like silver scales in an ancient dream. Vegetation grows so wildly that every step you take feels like tearing through a curtain of time. Vines coil tightly around towering trees, slithering upward like dormant serpents ready to awaken if disturbed. Fruit of all kinds litters the forest floor, some crushed underfoot, others split open, oozing a pungent, sour scent of rotting juice mixed with damp soil, mildew, and something nameless that is decaying. Flies buzz frantically, swarming the discarded fruit peels, while the only sound you can truly hear is the constant, high-pitched drone of unseen creatures nesting in the shadows. The chirping of jungle crickets pierces the air like overtuned violin strings, rhythmic, sharp, and full of warning. In the distance, somewhere deep within the forest, a low, muffled howl echoes, dark and guttural, like the breath of a beast no human has ever dared to name. Welcome to 16th century South America, a time when the world was still seen through the lens of myth. This was an era in which people believed that deep within the jungle stood cities made entirely of solid gold, that gods hid behind every leaf, and that anyone bold enough, anyone burning with ambition, could carve out a glorious empire at the edge of the known world. But it was also here, in this land seemingly overflowing with opportunity, that the most radiant dreams quickly turned into tragedy, and the brightest souls were consumed by the very fire of their own desire. Amid all the wild, chaotic splendor of nature, one name began to rise like a dangerous whisper carried on the wind: Lope de Aguirre. He was not a hero on a white horse, not a commander famed for triumphs in battle, nor a conquistador adorned in the shining glory of history. Lope de Aguirre entered the stream of history by another path, a path paved with blood, rage, and a quiet madness that spread like oil across the surface of the mind. At first, he was just an anonymous soldier, a humble member of an expedition in search of El Dorado, the legendary city of gold that had bewitched generations of Spaniards. But as the expedition plunged deeper into the jungle, surrounded by venomous insects, ferocious rivers, unrelenting hunger, and a heat so suffocating it seemed to seep into the bones, the brightest flickers of hope began to fade like falling stars losing their way. It was in these exhausted, desperate days, beneath the shadowed canopy and the cruelty of the natural world, that layer by layer, Aguirre's humanity began to fall away, faith turned to delusion. Reason faded like the last moon of a dying season. And a new being began to take shape. Not a man searching for gold, but a man determined to become a king within this green hell. Aguirre gradually ceased to be a man in the conventional sense. He transformed into something else entirely, as though he had shed his human skin and now lived and acted according to a code of his own, untethered from any law, morality, or standard of civilization. Every decision he made carried the weight of cold-blooded extremity, so merciless that no one dared question him. If anyone in the expedition voiced dissent, the punishment was death. If someone even showed hesitation in their gaze or uncertainty in their speech, they too would face a severe reckoning. There were no courts, no laws, no councils of judgment. Only one thing remained to be recognized as law: his absolute will. He began to believe in something greater than himself, a fierce and terrifying conviction that he had been chosen by a divine power. That the gods had pointed their fingers at him among the masses and entrusted him with a sacred mission, to found a new kingdom. In his eyes, even the Spanish Empire, seemingly untouchable, would eventually have to bow before a new order, one forged by his hand from the uncharted wilderness. In an act unimaginable to anyone of his time, Aguirre wrote directly to King Philip II of Spain. But this was not a plea for mercy, nor a humble report of his journey. On the contrary, it was a bold, defiant declaration. In the letter, he not only renounced his loyalty to the crown, but openly declared that he was no longer bound by any earthly power. He saw himself as a sovereign, the ruler of lands he was yet to conquer. The letter bore his name in a firm, proud script, like a gauntlet thrown not only at the feet of royalty, but at the face of history itself. That moment marked Aguirre's final step away from reason, and his descent into the abyss of madness. From that moment on, the air around him thickened with silence and fear. Those who followed him no longer knew what fear meant, for fear had calcified into something numb and permanent. They no longer spoke aloud. No laughter, no arguments, no conversations. Only slow, heavy footsteps, hollow stares, and a suffocating quiet that clung to the man they no longer knew how to name. Was he still a leader, or a wild beast wearing a man's skin? They called him El Loco, the madman. But the name was not an insult, it was a kind of exorcism, a whispered incantation they hoped might keep disaster at bay. You are now walking the very path Aguirre once trod. Sweat soaks through the back of your shirt, seeping into every layer of fabric. As each step feels heavier, as if you are being dragged down by the unseen weight of his story. In your mind, you see him sitting motionless, legs crossed, hand clenched tightly around the hilt of a sword resting across his lap. His eyes are wide open, unblinking, fixed on the jungle ahead, as though deep in conversation with an unseen force hiding behind the trees. You imagine the moment he ordered a man's execution, simply because that man had glanced sideways at the wrong time. And then, like a blade slicing through your mind, the most painful image appears. Aguirre killed his own daughter. That little girl left no name in the annals of history. No portraits were painted. No statues were carved. No inscriptions mourned her. And yet, even though no one truly knows her, you can see her eyes clearly, eyes as clear as a morning lake, shimmering with sorrow, despair, and not a trace of blame. Those eyes looked up at her father one last time, just before all light and hope were swallowed by darkness. Perhaps Aguirre believed that killing her was a way to spare her from the savage torture of their enemies. Or perhaps, by then, he could no longer tell friend from foe. Whatever the reason, that moment marked the beginning of something even his most loyal followers had never dared to hope for. They began to silently pray, for his fall, for the madness to end. Aguirre's dream of empire ultimately collapsed, and it ended in the very place it began, the jungle. As Spanish forces closed in around the area where he had made his final stand, he did not flee, did not surrender. He stood tall, eyes blazing, screaming into the void as if challenging the heavens, defying the very monarchy he had renounced. But those who once followed him had long been drained of strength, of belief. The last of them turned and walked away. They killed him not out of hatred, but in solemn silence. As if death was the only way to bring an end to a nightmare that had gone on too long. His body was quartered. Each part hung in a different place across the region, as if death alone was not enough to punish what he had done. But to the jungle, Aguirre never truly died. He simply dissolved into the shadows, melted into the breeze rustling through the canopy, becoming part of the forest, part of a haunting that still lives on. And then, centuries later, another artist stepped into that same jungle. Director Werner Herzog, camera in hand, ventured into the realm once filled with the clang of swords and imperial ambition. The film, Aguirre, The Wrath of God, was not just a work of art. It was a ritual. Actor Klaus Kinski became Aguirre, standing on a drifting raft surrounded by wild monkeys. His eyes empty, his gaze distant, as if speaking to forgotten dreams. He mumbled words about an empire that never was, as if still refusing to accept that it was all over. Amid the murky light and suffocating humidity, his monologue rang out like a voice from the past, a curse not yet broken. You stop walking. The forest wind brushes your hair, carrying the scent of damp leaves and decay. The shadows beneath the canopy seem to stir, as if something is waking up. No one speaks. No human voice remains. Only the sounds of the earth, the forest, and memory. Aguirre is dead, but his story never ended. The jungle slowly retreats behind you like an ancient door closing, gradually, silently. Each step you take away from that place feels like leaving another world behind, one made of shadows, rustling leaves, and the lingering scent of damp grass and rotting wood that still clings to your mind like a memory barely touched. The canopy that once crowded overhead, forming a dense green roof where sunlight could only trickle through in narrow beams, now fades like the remnants of a dream long gone. In the thickening silence, even the sparse rustle of leaves seems distant, unreal, as if nature itself is whispering a final farewell before letting you pass into an entirely different reality. What once was a fortress of foliage overhead now remains only as faint patches of green, hovering high above, adrift, fragile, swallowed by a sky that has turned a dull, ashen gray, like cooled embers. Those green flecks seem lost amid the misty air, like tiny bamboo rafts adrift in a cold ocean of brewing storms. The ground beneath your feet is no longer a soft carpet of forest mulch, cushioning your steps like the first moments in the jungle. It has shifted into hard, gray stone. Its jagged, chilled surface receives each footfall with an unspoken warning. The tangled roots that once clung to the earth like weathered brown hands, holding you back with the pull of the forest, are now completely gone. Giving way to a barren path, raw, still, and unsettling in its emptiness. The air around you changes abruptly, as if someone has drawn a freezing curtain over the entire scene. A sudden gust of wind strikes, a whip-like lash of cold so fierce and unexpected it halts you in your tracks. Riding on that wind is the heavy stench of salt, sharp and unmistakable, mixed with the metallic tang of distant, ancient seas. It snakes through the folds of your clothes, sinks into your skin, and clings there like an invisible frost. The fine hairs on your body rise instinctively, alert, as if your flesh knows what your mind has not yet admitted, that this is not a place for the faint of heart. The air is not just cold. It is thick, saturated with a kind of sorrow, as though it holds within it the condensed sighs of 1,000 years. Unspoken words that never found an answer. Sound itself grows oppressive. Not from noise, but from an absence so dense it feels as though silence has weight. Every movement, both in the world and in your own limbs, slows under that weight, as if even time resists your entry into this place. You look down. Your feet have now completely left behind the soft, damp earth of the ancient forest. You're standing on a lead-gray stone surface, dry, uneven, and unyielding. Small rocks and bits of gravel crunch beneath your heels, cold and lifeless. Before you stretches a landscape so unfamiliar, so arresting, that every sense reels from the shock. This is no longer a forest, it is an entirely different world, wild, unforgiving, and ancient, as if it has not changed in centuries. You are standing on the Isle of Skye. The Isle of Skye, off the northwest coast of Scotland, is not a land that welcomes human life easily. This ground offers no refuge, no shelter. The rocks here are not merely rocks, they are blades of stone, sharp as knives, cold as steel, and still as tombstones. The wind is not a gentle breeze through fields, but a host of invisible knives slicing the air, biting into your skin, settling deep into your bones. The clouds are not just passing veils of vapor, but heavy gray drapes, soaked with blood and tears, stretched across the sky like an eternal shroud. All around you, the sea is gray, its surface eerily still, like a cold mirror reflecting a world long dead. But beneath that calm facade churn violent undercurrents. Whirlpools like hungry maws lying in wait to devour any who dare underestimate the sea's cruelty. From that water, dense mists rise in thick, slow layers, blanketing the land like a sodden quilt soaked in seawater and human blood. That wetness seeps into every crack in the rocks, into every seam of your clothing, into the deepest corners of your mind, until there is no such thing as dry or safe anymore. The cliffs along the shore rise steep and jagged, dark as coal, jutting from the sea like the teeth of a great beast, baring its fangs in silent menace. The sound of the ocean wind colliding with them gives rise to chilling wails, echoing across the expanse like the cries of 1,000 restless souls. Overhead, lonely seabirds circle through the ashen sky, their hoarse calls slicing through the fog like faint, broken sobs, warnings, perhaps, whispered from another world. Everything you see, hear, and feel stirs within you a primal fear, one that does not come from reason, but from instinct. It feels as though you no longer stand in the world of the living, but have wandered into a place where life is nothing more than a distant memory. A land preserved not for the living, but for remembrance, for mourning, and for warning. And then, in that moment, everything halts. The wind stops howling, the waves fall silent, and even the mist seems to freeze mid-air. You sense, with piercing clarity, that you are no longer simply standing on an island, you are stepping into a sacred memory, a place where time and space blur like a fading dream, carrying you back to a fateful moment in Scotland's history, a moment of pain, of pride, and of the birth of an eternal legend. In the year 1305, on this cold, desolate, and unforgiving isle, the life of one man ended, but the legend of another began. William Wallace. His name is no longer just a name. It is a call echoing through generations, a banner raised high, a vow sworn in blood. Wallace was not born into wealth, nor raised by power or privilege. He had no throne, no court, and no grand entourage. He was merely a son of Scotland, a knight without title, an ordinary man among many, yet from that very ordinariness, he emerged from the shadows to become a symbol of courage, of defiance, and above all, of a flame that never died out, the flame of freedom. In 1297, when the shadows of division, fear, and oppression spread across Scotland, William Wallace rose. He had no grand army, no backing from noble lords, only a sword in hand and a fire in his heart. He shouted aloud what generations before him had only dared to whisper. He did not cry out to start a war, but to awaken a nation lulled into submission, freedom. At Stirling Bridge, where the ground was damp with morning dew and the river Forth flowed silently by like a witness to history, Wallace led an army of barefoot farmers, of common men with dirt under their nails and courage in their chests. They had no gleaming spears, no polished armor, no training in the parade grounds of kings. All they had was willpower, righteous fury, and an unquenchable thirst for one thing, freedom. When the English army marched into the battlefield, rank after rank in heavy armor, under a sky choked with banners, they may have thought they were entering a parade. But there, on that narrow, slippery bridge, Wallace laid his trap with masterful precision, turning each enemy footstep into folly. Every swing of his sword cut not only through armor, but through the pride of an empire. It wasn't just a spectacular military victory, it was a blow to the myth of English invincibility, a roar of defiance from a people long oppressed. It was the loudest declaration yet, the Scots do not bow, but every light must eventually face its shadow. By 1305, fate took its cruelest turn. Betrayal didn't come from the enemy. It came from within. Sir John Menteith, a Scottish noble by blood, seized Wallace and handed him over to King Edward I. That English king was not merely a ruler by might, he was the embodiment of unfeeling cruelty, a man they called the Hammer of the Scots, whose heart was said to be as cold and hard as the grey stones of the Highland cliffs. The price Wallace paid for his courage and hunger for freedom was not simple death. It was a sentence designed to humiliate, to crush, to erase the very symbol he had become. He was dragged to London, not with the honor of a warrior, but as a criminal. In the eyes of the invaders, he stood accused of treason. Yet when Wallace faced the court, surrounded by jeers, drowning in an air thick with hatred and contempt, he did not bow. His response rang out with clarity, echoing through centuries, "I could not be a traitor, for I was never his subject." Then the day of execution came. It was no solemn rite, it was a gruesome spectacle designed to terrify, to brutalize, to annihilate hope. Wallace was hauled through the streets of London, his body laid across a wooden plank, scraped and bleeding, treated like a broken object hurled across the earth. The crowd lined the streets, some jeering, others throwing stones, mouths spewing venomous curses. But amid that violent sea of scorn, Wallace remained silent. His face bore not fear nor pain, but an uncanny calm. His eyes, they looked as though they had seen something beyond both life and death. When he was hanged, they made sure he wouldn't die. They cut him down while life still flickered in his body, and then the real torment began. In what remains one of the most brutal executions in medieval English history, he was disemboweled while fully conscious, castrated to degrade him, and finally beheaded to end the blood-soaked spectacle. But even that savagery did not stop there. His body was quartered, and the pieces were sent to the four corners of the realm. Flesh and blood turned into warnings, each fragment a grotesque letter spelling out the price of resistance. They believed that by doing so, they had erased his name from history, but it was in that very moment of savage fury that William Wallace became immortal. They could kill him, could tear his body into 100 pieces, but they could never destroy the longing for freedom that he had ignited. They could not sever his spirit from the soul of Scotland. The name Wallace became an incantation, a cry from the past echoing in the dreams of the children of this misty land. He became a living emblem of resistance, an undying flame smoldering beneath the frost of tyranny. A thunderclap rolling across the hills of the Highlands. Centuries later, Hollywood would resurrect him in the film Braveheart. Though not entirely accurate in its historical details, the moment when Wallace cries freedom before his final breath became one of the most stirring scenes in cinematic history. It was more than a performance, it was a roar from the depths of a trampled people's heart, a tolling bell for anyone who had ever forgotten that freedom is never a gift, it is a price paid in blood and tears. You stand silently at the edge of Skye's cliffs, where the wind lashes your face like a whip, where the thick mist hangs heavy like mourning cloth for a soul not yet at rest. In that numbing cold, in that solitary stillness, you can feel him. Not as a ghost, but as a symbol. A gaunt figure with eyes that pierce through the ages, eyes that seem to be looking straight at you. Even bound by rope and iron, he stands tall, unbroken, unbowed, and you understand now, Wallace never truly died. He lives on in every footstep taken by the people of Scotland today, in the rushing wind across the Highlands, in every ballad sung about their days of glory. The flame he lit blazed on in the heart of Robert the Bruce. Roared in the declaration of Arbroath, and forever burns in the unyielding spirit of a defiant people. You leave Skye behind, leave the fog and the sea winds in your wake, but not the memory. On that old London bridge, where his head once rested on a spike as a grim warning, those same eyes seem to still gaze forward. Not into the past, but into the future. A future where his scream is no longer a cry of desperation, but a triumphant anthem, and if you stop long enough, stay quiet enough, if you open your heart and truly listen, to the wind, to the birds, to the crashing waves of far-off Skye, you'll hear it. A small sound, but one that never fades. It comes not from the present, but from a distant time. Not from a man's mouth, but from a spirit that cannot be broken, a whisper, a cry, a message carried through the ages, freedom. You turn your back on the windswept cliffs of Scotland, where sea-soaked gusts once lashed your skin like icy whips, and step into an entirely different world. Before you lies a vast plain, stretching endlessly like a sheet of colorless, dusty gray cloth, where even the tender grass seems dyed in hues of quiet melancholy and solemn stillness. The air here is so strange it makes you stop and listen. A nameless stillness hangs over everything, not a gentle peace, but a silence weighted with something suffocating, as though the earth itself is holding its breath, waiting for something to shatter. The sky above isn't blue. It's a heavy, murky gray, so thick it feels as if you could touch it if you just reached up. There is no rain, no storm, yet everything seems pressed down by an invisible weight that even sunlight cannot escape. The light falls timidly to the earth, cautious not to disturb anything, as if it fears that shining too boldly might awaken secrets long buried by the centuries. You are no longer in the desolate land of stone and tempest. Now, you are standing in the heartland of America, in the fields of Missouri. The year is 1804, a moment etched into the American timeline as a turning point, and before you lie the faint traces of a monumental journey. A journey forever linked to the name Meriwether Lewis, one of the two leaders of the legendary Lewis and Clark expedition, entrusted by President Thomas Jefferson to explore and document the vast Louisiana territory newly acquired by the United States. That expedition, marked by brutal challenges, fragile negotiations with native tribes, roaring rivers, and nameless mountain ranges, carved itself into the American imagination as a grand epic of exploration. In that golden light, Lewis returned a hero, with detailed journals, precise maps, and the first scientific studies of the region's flora. But that brilliant light didn't last. The path your feet now follow does not lead to celebration or glory, but instead traces the faded outline of a tragic end. You do not meet Meriwether Lewis in his hour of triumph, but on his final road, where darkness had crept in, silently, and made its home in his mind. In October of 1809, Lewis set out from St. Louis toward Washington, D.C., traveling along the Natchez Trace, a long, lonely trail winding through the dense wilderness and silent hills of Tennessee. The purpose of his journey was to resolve mounting financial and administrative troubles related to his role as governor of the Louisiana Territory. But what unfolded along that route was something entirely different. Lewis carried with him not only luggage and documents, but also an invisible burden, a psychological weight that had grown darker and heavier with time. According to records, his belongings included 2 pistols, a small hatchet, several important papers, and a loyal servant. These, it was believed, were sufficient to ensure his safety on such a solitary journey. Yet despite that, Lewis chose to stop for the night at a small, remote and deep in the woods, a place called Grinder's Stand, the starting point of a mystery that has never been resolved. That night, according to the innkeeper's account, was unlike any other. The sky was pitch black, moonless, starless, and utterly still save for the chirping of crickets. Then, suddenly, a gunshot rang out, sharp and jarring. Silence fell again. Then a second shot echoed, this one seeming to rise from the very depths of the forest. In the haze of night, Lewis appeared at the cabin door, drenched in blood, his face ghostly pale, his eyes distant and hollow. He stumbled forward, steadying himself against the wooden wall, and with trembling lips, begged for a glass of water. By morning, as the dim light crept through the window, Lewis had drawn his final breath. He died in solitude, in a place far from home, with no friends, no family, only the silent trees bearing witness to the final moments of his life. From that moment on, the story grew tangled. Conflicting testimonies, puzzling details, and a lack of clear evidence gave rise to a maze of theories. Some claimed he took his own life, driven to despair by crushing political pressures and depression. Others insisted he was murdered, perhaps silenced by a hidden force, or perhaps the victim of an elaborate cover-up. Still others pointed to his servant, suggesting a shadowy role in the tragedy of that night. Whatever the truth may be, the death of Meriwether Lewis remains one of the great unsolved mysteries in American political history. A death without closure, casting a long shadow over a life that once burned as brightly as the prairie sunrise. And now, as you stand in that very place, where ancient oaks still murmur in the wind, you feel as though the past has never truly left. It is still here, quietly watching, waiting for someone patient enough to listen. The official story, the one passed down through generations in records and oral tradition, is that Meriwether Lewis took his own life. According to these accounts, he is said to have fired 2 shots into his own body on that fateful night. One bullet piercing his abdomen, the other lodging in his head. He died alone, in a crumbling wooden room at a remote roadside inn, with no family beside him, no final words, only the darkness and the slow, fading rhythm of a breath coming to an end. Some say he was suffering from depression. Others point to chronic bouts of malaria, or perhaps a psychological illness too complex for the medicine of the time to diagnose or treat. After the blazing triumph of the expedition, it seems he may have gradually lost himself, adrift in a maze of political intrigue, fading public admiration, and unseen wounds that gnawed at him from within. Yet not everyone has accepted this version of events. For more than 2 centuries, historians, scholars, and passionate amateur sleuths have continued to debate the truth, raising difficult, persistent questions. Was it really suicide? Or was his death part of a larger, hidden plot, a carefully staged act designed to bury something deeper? The evidence is murky. And the more one examines the final chapter of Lewis's life, the more unsettling details begin to surface. In the days leading up to his death, Lewis wrote numerous letters to friends, officials, and even to the president himself. These letters were far from consistent. Some were disjointed and despairing, while others struck a tone of hope and determination, full of plans to resolve his financial and administrative troubles. This contradiction ignited doubt. If he truly intended to end his life, why was he organizing official reports for government review? Why write about his imminent return to the capital? And most of all, could a man seriously wound himself with 2 shots from a flintlock pistol? An unwieldy weapon, slow to reload and requiring multiple steps, then still manage to walk out of his room, speak coherently, and ask for water. Suspicion deepened when several pages of his journal inexplicably vanished. These were valuable documents detailing not only the expedition, but also Lewis's reflections on the political tensions of the time, none of which were ever recovered. Witness accounts of that night were riddled with inconsistencies, hard to verify, and no one could clearly explain what really took place in that small cabin. Stranger still was the reaction of President Thomas Jefferson, Lewis's longtime friend, mentor, and the man who had once entrusted him with the nation's most ambitious mission. Jefferson's response was bafflingly cold. He called for no investigation, issued no appeal for justice, and offered only a brief, muted eulogy before retreating entirely from the affair, leaving behind a silence that echoed louder than any explanation. Was it a silent grief he could never confess, or a deliberate silence to guard a secret never meant to be revealed? No one knows for certain, but that silence has haunted generations of historians, casting suspicion on the role of the government itself in the matter. Meriwether Lewis's death, therefore, is not only a personal tragedy, but a murky stain on the political history of the United States. The aftermath was bitter and heavy. His grave was marked only by a plain stone, with no monument, no grand memorial, though he had once blazed the trail into uncharted lands. Penned the opening chapters of a growing America, his death was buried beneath indifference and controversy. Only decades later did the country begin to acknowledge his legacy with any real weight. Some states erected memorials, scholars revisited his journals, and media slowly pulled his name out of the shadows. But no matter how delayed the recognition, the wound remains unhealed. Because the most fundamental questions were never answered, now, you stand where grinders stand once stood, the humble inn where the life of a great explorer came to an abrupt, silent end. The building is long gone, only a solitary stone marker endures, cold and unfeeling in the middle of an empty clearing. The surrounding trees, though they've shed their leaves 1,000 times since, still lean toward the site, as if offering one last gesture of shelter. The wind rustles through their branches, carrying the scent of damp earth and the murmur of something unspeakable. The old trace is still here too, long and quiet, stretching into the distance as though it never truly closed. You stand still in that moment, and in the depth of your thoughts rises an inescapable question: how could a man once hailed by an entire nation, once immortalized for a heroic journey across a continent, vanish like a shadow, alone, unwept, unseen? Some blame the blinding fire of glory, burning him from within. Others believe it was political betrayal and hidden agendas that pushed him over the edge. Still others say that after wandering for years through wilderness and silence, witnessing nature's raw truths, human fragility, and the failings of the very civilization he once believed in, he could never truly return. Whatever the answer may be, the death of Meriwether Lewis remains an open question, quiet, unresolved, and haunting, in the stream of American history, a death unproven, unguarded, unconsoled. Before you, the red dirt path coils like a serpent, vanishing into a horizon the color of ash. There is no one else here, only your footsteps mingling with the breath of the wind and the quiet rhythm of the land. The air feels thicker now, as if every breath you draw carries the weight of centuries still seeking rest. And then, from somewhere in the distance, a single crow cries out. Its call slices through the silence, cold and sharp as a warning. The sound lingers for a moment in the empty air, then vanishes, leaving behind a stillness even heavier than before. There is only you, and the darkness, and the questions that have never been answered. You stand frozen in that moment, as the solitary cry of the crow continues to echo from somewhere far away, like a strange invocation tugging at your every step, pulling you gently into the folds of the past. The sound no longer feels like the ominous call of a bird of ill omen. Instead, it weaves around you like an invisible thread, slowly drawing you in, guiding you through the fading veils of time, until, quite suddenly, the world before you shifts completely. The land beneath your feet is no longer the barren, desolate ground marked by loss. What now opens before you is a landscape so delicately crafted it borders on perfection, as though nature itself is carefully preserving one final breath of peace before the storm arrives. Stretching out before you is a lush green carpet of grass, soft as velvet, trimmed with such precision that each curve flows with the natural shape of the land. Between the gently sloping lines are shrubs sculpted into the shapes of drifting clouds, suspended low against the earth. Slender bamboo groves rise with graceful verticality, swaying slightly under the cool breath of the night wind. That wind threads through every leaf, composing a quiet symphony of rustles, like the soft sigh of time itself. In a secluded corner of this still world, a small lotus pond reveals itself. The water is still as glass, rippling only faintly when a delicate petal trembles on its stem. White and pink lotuses stretch upward from the surface. swaying gently as if to welcome something that is just beyond the horizon. Tiny lanterns hang along the edge of the pond, casting warm amber glows that shimmer on the water's skin, like spirit flames standing guard over something sacred and long forgotten. The air is at once pure and tinged with a melancholic ache, as if this garden is more than a place, it's a heart space, tenderly preserved by nameless memories. You are standing in Kyoto, the year is 1582, and in this moment, even with your eyes closed, you can feel history shifting beneath your feet. The air here is still, so still it sends a chill down your spine. But it is not the calm of peace. It is a dense, heavy stillness, like a storm cloud swollen with rain, like a bowstring pulled to the brink, ready to snap. As if everything around you is holding its breath, waiting for something inevitable to unfold. Every breath you take, every faint sound, echoes louder in your mind. You realize you are no longer just an observer, you are part of this fateful moment. You step carefully through the gate into the grounds of Honnoji Temple, where the dim glow of lanterns casts long, overlapping shadows across the stone paths and wooden walls. Each footstep you take on the polished floor brings a faint creak from the boards beneath, joining a soundscape so dreamlike, so distant, it seems half-imagined, the quick, rhythmic clack of wooden clogs from afar, the gentle, ominous rattle of armor, and within it all, the nearly imperceptible whisper of a sword being drawn, its metallic breath slicing through the air like it could sever time itself. You are standing in a moment where history is about to change forever. A single night, but one powerful enough to shake an entire era. For tonight, the most powerful man in Japan will fall. Not by the force of an enemy's army, but by betrayal, carefully orchestrated within the very heart of the loyalty he once trusted. Oda Nobunaga, his name already a symbol of the violent, chaotic Sengoku period, was a rare military genius. A bold tactician and an uncompromising leader, he shattered the rigid molds of the samurai class to forge a new era from their ashes. He was one of the three warlords later honored as the three great unifiers, those who lifted Japan from the darkness of division and civil war. Nobunaga didn't just change the way battles were fought. By daring to introduce firearms to the battlefield, he transformed how power itself was perceived. He crushed mighty clans, established dominion stretching from the Kansai region to the distant eastern provinces, and imposed order upon a country long splintered by centuries of internal strife. Under his iron hand and calculating mind, the vision of a unified Japan was finally beginning to take shape, and yet, just as that dream stood within reach, Nobunaga chose, on this fateful night, to dine with a man few would have suspected would become his executioner, Akechi Mitsuhide. A loyal right hand. A man who had once served with unwavering devotion. Now, he was preparing to strike, decisively and without hesitation. And Nobunaga, the man revered to the point where some believed he was no mere mortal, had no idea of the doom that awaited. One eerie detail, passed down through the generations, still sends a chill down the spine. Oda Nobunaga, with his brutal nature and cold, commanding presence, once called himself the demon king of the sixth heaven. It was no idle boast. In Buddhist cosmology, the sixth heaven is the realm where gods, consumed by desire, dwell, where wisdom and savagery blur together, and its ruler embodies unchecked power. By claiming that title, Nobunaga was making a declaration to the world: not even the gods could contain him. But here, on this very night, within the silent walls of Honnoji Temple, that truth is about to be undone. And history will forever record the moment Oda Nobunaga, the self-proclaimed demon king, once perched at the height of power, fell by the hand of the man who once knelt at his feet. A bitter, paradoxical end, one of the most stunning and tragic turning points in Japanese history. On the morning of June 21, 1582, before the first rays of sunlight could pierce the thin veil of mist that blanketed the Kyoto sky, history had already begun to stir. At Honnoji Temple, a place once known for serenity and rest, a retreat for warriors and aristocrats, Oda Nobunaga, one of the most powerful figures of the era, was staying with only a handful of his most loyal guards. None of them knew that within moments, this peaceful sanctuary would become the battlefield for one of the most shocking rebellions in Japanese history, and then, darkness arrived before the dawn, not from the sky, but from the armor-clad shadows of Akechi Mitsuhide's forces, silently closing in around the temple. Mitsuhide, the very general Nobunaga had favored, trusted, and promoted for years, was now the hand that would erase him from the map of power. The attack came swiftly, unexpectedly, and with brutal precision. No war drums, no blaring horns, only the clash of swords and the thunder of footsteps echoing through the wooden corridors, tearing through the sacred stillness like a scream in a chapel. The reason behind this betrayal has remained unanswered for centuries. Some say Mitsuhide harbored a deep personal grudge, humiliated by Nobunaga's public insults at a banquet. Others see it as a calculated political move, a bold attempt to overthrow the ruling force and seize ultimate power. Perhaps it was all of these: wounded pride, suppressed ambition, and a burning desire to prove one's worth in a society built on honor. Combined, they created a storm within Mitsuhide's heart, waiting for the one perfect moment to break free. You walk silently down a dark corridor, where the dim glow of oil lamps paints broken slashes of light across the deep brown wooden walls. Beneath your feet, the cool planks groan softly, as if whispering stories left untold. This is the final path Nobunaga walked in life, each hurried, heavy footstep echoing amid the chaos of a surprise assault, with the enemy already inside the temple walls. There was no time to summon reinforcements. Outnumbered, surrounded, and cornered, every escape route sealed, this master strategist who once shook the entire nation found himself in a trap with no way out. In those final moments, Nobunaga did not surrender, nor did he allow himself to be disgraced by the hand of a traitor. He drew his dagger and performed seppuku, the samurai's noble ritual of self-disembowelment, a death of dignity and honor. It was more than a warrior's act, it was the last decision of a man who once declared himself the Demon King, the one who would never bow. His blood spilled across the wooden floor, soaking into the grain, mingling with the lingering scent of incense, crafting a scene both tragic and awe-striking, but the story does not end there. As the blade drew blood, flames erupted. The entire Honnoji temple was soon engulfed in a sea of red fire, devouring everything in its path. When the inferno finally died down, no body of Oda Nobunaga was found. No corpse. No ashes. Only scorched earth and an eerie, gaping silence remained. In that moment, truth vanished into smoke, leaving behind a mystery suspended somewhere between history and legend. From that moment on, as the years passed, the rumors began to spread like wildfire. Some swore that Nobunaga had perished in the flames, his body consumed completely, leaving no trace behind. Yet others claimed he had escaped at the final moment, casting aside his power to live the life of a common man, waiting patiently for the day of his return. There were those who said they had seen him deep in the mountains, living as a hermit, or wandering quietly from village to village, a ghost cloaked in human form. Truth or fantasy, no one could say for certain. Reason clung to the simplest explanation, that the fire had devoured everything, and yet, the death of Nobunaga struck Japan like an earthquake. Akechi Mitsuhide, no matter how carefully he had schemed, held power for only 13 days. Less than 2 weeks after the betrayal, he was hunted down and crushed by Toyotomi Hideyoshi, a man who had once been a nameless peasant and had risen through brilliance and grit to become a general under Nobunaga's command. The power Mitsuhide had grasped for, so fiercely, so briefly, was extinguished just as swiftly, overtaken by a force even greater. Hideyoshi would go on to complete what his fallen master had begun, laying the foundation for a unified Japan. The death of Oda Nobunaga reads like a tragedy penned by the gods themselves, steeped in betrayal, ambition, and sorrow, like a Japanese echo of Shakespeare. A proud ruler. A fearless warrior. A cunning statesman. And yet he fell by the hand of the very man who had stood behind him through 100 battles. Nobunaga had once been so confident, so certain of his invincibility, that he failed to see the blade coming from the shadows. It was his misplaced trust, his pride too large to contain, that brought him to ruin. Today, Though Hanoji Temple has been rebuilt, in every wooden crevice, every garden stone, the faint trace of smoke still seems to linger. That scent, sweet and bitter all at once, hangs in the air like an unspoken warning about the fragility of power. Power that can be carved out through decades of war and rule, can also collapse in a single night of fire, with a single knife from behind. You walk beneath the fractured gate, fingertips brushing the weathered stones, ears tuned to the soft whisper of wind weaving through trembling leaves. In that moment, your shadow stretches across the aged courtyard, heavy with the memory of a vanished empire. Your steps slow, grow heavier. As though the very soul of the demon king walks behind you, and somewhere, between the haze of forgotten dreams and the murmurs passed from generation to generation, people still say he never truly disappeared. That the demon king, in another form, still waits to return, carrying with him both glory and darkness. The scent of smoldering cedar wood drifts gently through the air, curling upward in slow, delicate spirals. It lingers in the twilight, rich and ancient, like the final breath of something sacred. The smoke dances momentarily in the soft light, swaying as if reluctant to vanish, before fading into the thickening haze that blurs the edges of this shifting world. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, everything around you begins to change. It is not a sudden transformation, but a gradual unraveling, as though the very fabric of space is being softly rewoven into something strange, unfamiliar, and dreamlike. The once solid walls of the temple around you begin to melt away, their defined edges growing faint and pliable. What was once firm stone now looks as if made from mist, trembling and translucent. Then, without warning, the walls stretch upward. They rise with an eerie elegance, pulled skyward by some vast, invisible force, beyond the laws of physics and time. The ceiling expands, opening like the petals of a mythical flower, revealing a grand, vaulted dome above. A warm golden light begins to spill across the floor and walls, not from any sun or torch, but from hundreds of flickering candles. Their glow glistens on the surface of the ceiling, which now gleams with intricate mosaics, tiny shards of gold and glass arranged in patterns so elaborate they seem woven by divine hands. They sparkle like a field of stars. Caught and frozen in mid-twinkle, the air feels heavy, dense with something you cannot name. Not merely heat or scent, but tension. A breathless expectancy, as if the entire world is holding itself still, poised on the edge of an unseen precipice. It is the electric quiet before a shattering storm. The impossible stillness of the instant just before a terrible fall. You are in Constantinople. This is not the romanticized version whispered in legends or painted in gilded manuscripts. This is the true Constantinople, vast, opulent, trembling beneath the weight of its own majesty. The city once called the crown jewel of the Byzantine Empire. The year is 1204, and the city, despite its unmatched splendor, stands on the brink of ruin. Yet its enemies are not its ancient rivals from the east, not the warriors of Persia or the caliphs of Arabia. No, the threat is far more intimate, far more painful. Constantinople stands under siege from the west, attacked by those who profess the same religion, who call upon the same God. Crusaders. Supposed brothers in faith. And now, you are about to witness not a glorious defense, but a downfall so profound, so catastrophic, it will ripple through the corridors of history for centuries. Welcome to the Fourth Crusade, but let us be clear from the beginning, this was a crusade that veered wildly off its intended path. It did not march to the Holy Land, did not reach the sacred stones of Jerusalem. Instead, it spiraled into betrayal, consumed by debts unpaid, oaths twisted, and ambitions inflamed. Pulled into a web of schemes woven by cunning Venetian merchants, the Crusaders turned not toward salvation, but toward plunder. And what followed was not a war of faith, but a catastrophe. The Crusaders did not merely breach the gates of Constantinople. They stormed in like a tidal wave of iron and fire. They looted without mercy, tore down what had been revered, and violated what had been protected for generations. The heart of Eastern Christendom, a place of unmatched heritage and spiritual richness, was ransacked by those who claimed to defend the faith. It was as if someone, sent to rescue a cherished friend, instead arrived and set their home ablaze in a fit of confusion and madness. The city was consumed by chaos. Fires ignited everywhere, erupting like curses called down from above. They spread rapidly, licking through marketplaces, engulfing noble houses, and swallowing entire districts in blinding flames. Sanctuaries that once echoed with sacred chants became targets of greed. Churches were not spared. Their icons were torn from the walls, their relics ripped from hidden altars, their sanctity defiled by rough hands that once held rosaries. The destruction extended beyond the visible. Libraries, vast and ancient, filled with rare scrolls, illuminated manuscripts, and the accumulated wisdom of civilizations, were destroyed. Burned to cinders. Stolen and scattered. Knowledge that had weathered centuries vanished in hours. The smoke rising from those ruins did not just carry the scent of burning paper. It carried the end of a legacy, and amidst this pandemonium, the emperor, once a symbol of divine authority, met not a hero's death, but a tragic unraveling. His name was Alexios V. Doukas. Remembered as the last true emperor of Constantinople before its collapse into chaos. His downfall, swift and merciless, is a tale soaked in irony and sorrow. For Alexios V was not born to the throne. He was not raised with the polished manners of a courtly prince. His rise came in a time of discord, seized during a moment of internal fracture and desperation. He gained power through a coup, overthrowing another emperor, also named Alexios, in a tangled plot of betrayals that would make even the most dramatic historical novel seem tame. His reign lasted just weeks, a flicker in the shadow of centuries. And in those short weeks, he struggled, perhaps with all his strength, to defend the city. He tried. He fortified. He pleaded. But the tide of destruction was too great, and the enemies too close. When the walls were finally breached, Alexios V had no choice but to flee. Some say he intended to regroup and fight back. Others claim he was simply running, driven by the raw instinct to survive. Whatever his intention, fate would not be denied. He was captured, and in the traditions of the Byzantine court, where betrayal was often repaid with cruelty, he was sentenced to one of the most feared punishments, blinding. But his story did not end in darkness. Alexios V was not merely removed. He was executed in a manner as poetic as it was merciless. He was taken to the Column of Theodosius, a towering marble monument that had long symbolized imperial grandeur. There, from its dizzying height, he was hurled down. Thrown into the air like a broken offering to a city that no longer had room for emperors. Witnesses later described his fall with shuddering detail. The way his limbs twisted in the air. The way gravity stripped him of dignity with every passing second. His body struck the earth below with finality, a crumpled echo of the power he once held. It was not just the death of a man. It was the death of a world. That image, his body broken at the base of a monument to glory, etched itself into the memory of the city. It became a symbol not just of personal defeat, but of the ruin of an entire empire, for this was no death at the hands of pagans. This was not a martyrdom born of heretical assault. It was a killing by those who claimed kinship. Fellow Christians. Brothers in faith. The irony is so brutal, so biting, it feels like something crafted in fiction. And yet, it is carved into the stone of history. The sack of Constantinople did not merely end a chapter. It shattered the entire foundation of the Byzantine Empire. A civilization that had survived for over 1,000 years, one that had shielded Europe, preserved ancient knowledge, and served as a bridge between worlds, was reduced to rubble and dust. Its treasures, once held with reverence, were paraded as trophies. Among them, the famous bronze horses that now stand above the basilica in Venice, majestic and proud, were once torn from the very heart of this city, dragged westward as symbols of conquest. what remained of the empire was a husk. Its spirit broken. Its heart cut out. You stand now among those ruins. You hear the soft creak of broken timbers. You see scorched frescoes peeling from cracked walls. The scent of ash and burned incense still lingers. The shattered beauty of this place weeps in silence. Its domes, cracked and bowed, seem to mourn what was lost. Its streets, once vibrant with trade and music, echo now with only the sound of memory. This is not merely the fall of a ruler, this is the collapse of an entire order. A civilization's final breath, but even this is not truly the end. No great collapse ever is. From these ashes, something new will rise. Europe will stir again, altered and uncertain, fueled by new ambitions and haunted by the shadows of what it destroyed. The Middle East will chart its own course, scarred yet unyielding. And Byzantium, though gone, will not be forgotten. Its legacy will linger in texts, in art, in the imagination of every scholar, artist, and dreamer who dares to look back. And now, at last, you take one final breath, you begin to walk away, slowly, past the remnants of shattered mosaics, past the curled pages of burned scriptures, past the bent swords and hollow helmets left behind in the wreckage of ambition. Your journey has carried you through fires and betrayals, through thrones and tombs, through stories painted in ash and blood. You have seen the proud laid low, the humble exalted, the brave undone, and the cunning punished. So now, you allow yourself to exhale, and to step, quietly, gently, into the silence. And now, as you lie there, feeling your breath slow bit by bit, and your mind begin to drift deeper into the softness of your pillow, the clashing swords and roaring crowds of the ancient world begin to fade. The fires of battle have burned out, leaving only a single ember glowing faintly at the edge of memory, like a distant, flickering light beyond the shadows. History is, by nature, a sea of noise and chaos, shouts and cries, the echoes of glory and tragedy all tumbling over one another. But you've made it through. You've passed through the veil of that storm, crossed great empires, walked across frozen glaciers and blazing deserts, climbed palace steps worn smooth by time, entered crumbling temples. Met people long vanished, and heard the last breaths of their lives whisper through the vast corridors of time, and in all that glory and sorrow, every story ends in just one thing: silence, the silence that falls over a battlefield when the dust has settled, the silence that reigns in the throne room once the shouting has stopped, a vast, still silence, one that holds all the words never said, the emotions never explained. You've survived the greatest deaths in history, and that is no small thing. If you had truly been there, you likely wouldn't have made it through, but you didn't have to. You only had to listen, to imagine, to pass gently through the past like a soft shadow. A quiet whisper, a curious soul drifting ever onward. So now, as the final echoes fade, let your mind melt. Let your heart beat slow, let the stories rest, so you can slip into dreams woven from ancient legends, candlelit halls, and endless peace. The world will still be there, full of untold stories, when you wake, but for now, let yourself drift into a deep, gentle sleep. Sleep well.